The year was 1872. The Arizona Territory was a raw, red wound across the face of the earth, a place where the sun burned away everything but grit and shadow. This was a land that held no memory of kindness. It stretched from the thirsty basins of the desert floor to the unforgiving. Jagged peaks of the Sierra Madre, mountains that looked like the teeth of a broken saw. In those mountains, a man lived alone. His name, when he used it among white men, was Elias Kane. The name his mother had given him was gone, and the name the soldiers had whispered was one he tried to forget, Red Hawk. He was a man split down the middle, half Apache and half white, and he belonged to neither. He had worn the blue uniform of a scout for the United States Army, his eyes prized for their ability to read the subtle language of a broken twig or a disturbed pebble. He had believed, for a time, in the structure of the uniform, in the clarity of orders. That belief had ended in smoke and screaming. It ended at a place that had no name, a creek bed where the army, his army, had descended upon a village of sleeping Apache who were supposed to be under treaty. He had been forced to participate, to lead them to the camp he thought was being moved, not annihilated. The memory was not a clean thing. It was a physical weight in his chest, a permanent sickness. He had walked away from the slaughter, dropping his rifle, his papers, and his name, and he had never looked back. He was, by military law, a deserter. By his own law, he was a ghost. And now he lived in a small cabin built of scrub pine and mud, tucked into a high canyon where the wind was the only constant neighbor. He hunted, he trapped, sometimes. He descended to the flats to break wild mustangs for the ranchers, men who paid him in coin and kept their distance. The people of the nearby town, Drybone, spoke of him only when necessary. They called him the wild man, the half-breed. They saw the Apache in his high cheekbones and the straight black hair he kept tied back, and they feared it. They missed the ice blue of his father's eyes that looked out at the world and saw nothing left to value. Far to the east, in a world of brick sidewalks and green lawns, Clara Monroe had packed her life into a single trunk. She was a teacher, her hands made for chalk and the spines of books. She was coming west not for adventure, but for escape. Her heart had been thoroughly and politely broken by a man who valued his family's reputation more than her affection. Compounding this quiet humiliation were her father's debts, a ledger of shame that had auctioned off their respectability piece by piece. Clara had read the advertisement for a schoolmarm in Drybone, Arizona Territory. It sounded like the end of the world. It was exactly what she needed. She saw the West not as a place of savagery, as the dime novels portrayed it, but as a blank slate. It was a place where a person's past could be burned away by the relentless sun, leaving only the possibility of what came next. She was running from failure, hoping to find a small patch of earth where she could simply be useful. The stagecoach that carried her on the last leg of the journey was a box of agony. The heat was a physical presence, a thick blanket that smothered the air. For 3 days, she had been rattled and bounced, her Eastern clothes a mockery in the face of the endless, choking dust. The alkali powder caked her eyelashes and dried her throat, and the vast, silent emptiness outside the window terrified her more than any city crowd ever had. This was a land of brutal truths. It was a society balanced on the edge of a knife. Gold, blood, and freedom. Those were the only currencies that mattered. The law was whatever a man could enforce with the Colt revolver at his hip. Inequality was as natural as the heat. It was breathed in with the dust. The white man ran the town. The Mexican families lived in adobe huts by the dry riverbed. The Chinese laborers ran the laundry in suffocating steam. And the Apache, the people, were spoken of only as vermin, a threat to be eradicated. Elias Kane understood this world. He saw it for what it was, a graveyard of promises. Clara Monroe was arriving to see it as a cradle for new ones. Elias was tracking a pair of mountain lions that had grown too bold, straying close to the rancher's grazing land. He moved without sound, his gaze sweeping the ridgeline. He was patient. The desert had taught him that anything worth having, or killing, would eventually reveal itself. His focus was absolute until a faint tremor reached him. Not through the ground, but through the air. A disturbance. He shifted, moving higher, until he could see the wash below. The dry-bone stagecoach. It was stopped. That was wrong. 2 men on horseback were beside it. They were not professionals. Their movements were jerky, excited. They were after the horses, not the strongbox, a poor man's robbery. One man, burly and bearded, was cutting the traces, while the other, younger and nervous, held a rifle on the driver. Clara was standing in the dust beside the open door. Her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. The driver, a man named Silas, had his hands raised high. "Just take the team, boys," Silas said, his voice straining to be calm. "There ain't no need for blood." The bearded man laughed. "Shut up, old man." He glanced at Clara, his eyes lingering in a way that made her skin crawl. "Maybe we take more than the horses." The younger man licked his lips. "Jed, we ain't here for that. We're here for what I say we're here for," Jed snarled. Elias watched from the rocks, his face impassive. It was not his fight. He owed nothing to the stage line, and nothing to the people it carried. He had seen this scene 100 times in 100 variations. It was the way of this land. He was about to turn away when the bearded man, Jed, grabbed Clara's arm. She did not scream. She gasped, a sharp intake of breath, and she swung her travel reticule, heavy with her few books, striking the man across the face. It was a foolish, brave, Eastern thing to do. Jed roared, backhanding her across the mouth. Clara fell, her bonnet flying off, her dark hair tumbling into the white dust. She tasted the grit and the metallic tang of her own blood. Something shifted in Elias. It was not pity. It was something colder. It was the offense of sloppiness, of unnecessary cruelty. He had seen men killed for strategy, for land, for gold. But this was messy. It was wrong. He raised his Winchester. He did not aim for the man. He aimed for the ground 2 inches from his boot. The rifle crack echoed like a cannon shot in the narrow wash. Dust and gravel exploded where the bullet hit. "Hell!" the younger man yelled, spinning around, firing his rifle wildly toward the rocks. Jed let go of Clara and drew his revolver, squinting into the blinding sun, searching for the shadow that had shot at him. "Show yourself! Damn you!" Elias did not move. He was a part of the rock, a part of the heat. "He's up there!" the younger one shouted, pointing. Elias shifted his aim. This time, he did not miss. He fired once. The younger man crumpled, his rifle clattering on the stones. He made no sound. Jed stared at his partner, his face a mask of disbelief. He fired 3 wild shots into the rocks. "I'll kill you!" Elias levered another round into the chamber. He stepped out from the cover of the boulders, walking slowly down the incline. He did not run. He did not crouch. He moved with a terrible, patient calm. Jed saw him, a tall man, dressed in buckskin trousers and a linen shirt bleached pale by the sun. His face was dark, unreadable. His eyes were the color of a winter sky. "Stay back!" Jed screamed. He raised his pistol. Elias kept walking. He did not even raise his rifle. He just looked at the man. Clara, pushing herself up on her elbows, watched. She could not breathe. This new man. He was not rushing. He was not angry. He was simply coming. The driver, Silas, recognized him. "Lord God," he whispered. "It's Cain. It's Red Hawk." The name hit Jed harder than a bullet. He had heard the stories. The half-breed ghost who had walked away from the army. They said he could not be killed. Jed's hand began to shake. "I said stay back." Elias stopped, perhaps 30 yards away. He spoke, and his voice was low, rough, like stones grinding together. "You already took the horses." "What?" Jed was confused. You had the horses, Elias said. The fight was done. You should have ridden away.
He shot at us,
Jed yelled, gesturing at the driver. No, Elias said. He did not. You hit the woman. A terrible understanding dawned on Jed. This was not a negotiation. This was a judgment. He stared at Elias, his eyes wide with a sudden, animal terror. He knew this man. He had seen him before. Not in a canyon, but in a barracks. Sergeant, Jed whispered. The word was choked, horrified. Sergeant Kane. Elias's face tightened almost imperceptibly. His eyes went flat and dead. He recognized the man now. Private Jedediah Cole. A bully, a braggart, a man who had been at the creek, a man who had laughed. The past had just reached out and touched the present. Drop the gun, Cole, Elias said. Cole looked at the dead man. He looked at the ghost in front of him. He knew that Elias Kane never left a witness. He made a desperate choice. He raised his pistol and fired. The bullet went wide. Elias's rifle was already at his shoulder. The shot was deafening. Final. Jedediah Cole fell backward, his pistol spinning away in the dust. Silence descended. A thick, heavy silence, broken only by the whimpering of the stagecoach horses and the buzz of a fly. Clara stared at the man with the rifle. He had just killed 2 men. He had done it without changing his expression. He looked at the bodies, and then he looked at her. She was waiting for him to speak, to offer comfort, to say something. He did not. He turned to Silas. The driver. Your lead horse is limping. You will have to leave him. Silas nodded, swallowing. Yes, sir, Mr. Kane. Thank you, thank you. Elias Kane looked at the driver, his blue eyes holding no warmth at all. I did not do this for you. He walked over to the body of Jedediah Cole. He looked down at the man who had served under him, the man who had participated in the slaughter. He felt nothing. No satisfaction, no guilt, just emptiness. He bent and retrieved the man's canteen, checking to see if it was full. It was. He took it, along with a pouch of ammunition. He turned to Clara. She was still on the ground, her lips split, dust and blood streaking her cheek. She was looking at him with a raw terror that he understood. He should have said something. He should have offered her a hand. He could not. To touch her would be to taint her. He was a man marked by death. Get her to Drybone, Elias said to the driver. Do not stop for anything. He turned, his rifle held loosely in one hand, and began walking back toward the rocks. He did not look back. He melted into the heat and the shadows, disappearing as if he had never been there at all, leaving only the dead and the stunned silence. Clara Munro finally let out the breath she had been holding. Her entire body was shaking. She had come west seeking a new life, a place of rebirth. In her first day, she had come face to face with a man who was the absolute opposite. He was not a hero. He was not a savior. He was the desert itself, silent, beautiful, and possessing a terrible, quiet danger. The town of Drybone was little more than a scar of splintered wood and canvas tents baking in the Arizona sun. The stagecoach, pulled by the remaining mismatched horses Silas had managed to harness, limped into the single dusty street, every eye, from the prospectors panning dust in the dry creek to the merchants standing in the shade of their wooden awnings, turned to watch. They saw the blood on the driver's seat. They saw Clara Munro, her face pale, her lips swollen and split, her dark dress covered in white alkali dust. By the time Silas had stopped the team in front of the Wells Fargo office, a crowd had gathered. The story tumbled from the driver's lips in a torrent of relief and lingering terror. 2 men dead, an attempted robbery, and the schoolmarm. Saved. Who saved her? A man in a dusty bowler hat called out. Silas wiped his sweaty face with his sleeve. He lowered his voice, but in the dry air, the name carried like a shot. It was Kane, Red Hawk. A different kind of silence fell over the crowd. It was a thick, uneasy quiet. Men who had been leaning forward now straightened up, their expressions closing. The women, who had been whispering in sympathy, pulled their shawls tighter. The name was a bad omen. Sheriff Brody pushed through the crowd. He was a tall, pragmatic man whose star was pinned to a vest stained with sweat and tobacco. He had a face like worn leather, and his eyes had seen too much to be surprised by anything, even this. He tipped his hat to Clara, who was now being helped down by the station master. "Ma'am, you look like you have seen hell." "I believe I have, Sheriff," Clara said, her voice trembling but steady. "Silas, get the lady's trunk. Miss Monroe, the boarding house is just across the street. Ma Perkins will see to you. I will come by later to take your statement." "But the men," Clara said, looking back at the empty, shimmering horizon. "He just left them." "Mr. Kane has his own way of doing things," Brody said, his voice flat. He offered her his arm. "Welcome to Drybone. Ma'am, it is not always this exciting." But it was not excitement that settled on the town. It was suspicion. Clara Monroe had been delivered to them by the half-breed killer who lived in the mountains. She had been touched by something wild and unclean. Ma Perkins, a woman built like a burlap sack of flour, showed Clara to a small, clean room with a narrow bed. She provided a bowl of water and a clean rag, but her kindness was brittle. "You are lucky that savage was out there," she said, not looking Clara in the eye. "Though most folks find that running into Red Hawk is the worst kind of luck you can have. He is more animal than man, they say." Clara soaked the rag and pressed it to her split lip. Wincing, she said nothing. She had seen the man's eyes. They were not animal. They were human, and they were full of something she recognized, a profound and terrible loneliness. While the town whispered, Elias Kane walked. He moved for hours, climbing from the low desert scrub into the high canyons, his long strides eating the miles. The sun beat on his shoulders. He did not feel it. His mind was occupied by the face of Jedediah Cole, the name Sergeant dying on his lips. It had been years since he had been forced to kill a man who knew him. Cole was a loose thread from his past, a past he had tried to bury under miles of rock and silence. Killing him was not a choice. It was a necessity. But it had stirred the mud, the dead at the creek bed, the women and children whose ghosts haunted his sleep, rose to the surface of his memory. He had walked away from that massacre, but it had never truly let him go. He reached his cabin as the sun was touching the western rim of the world, painting the sky in violent shades of orange and purple. The cabin was his refuge, his prison. It stood on a small, flat mesa overlooking a riverbed that had not seen water in a decade. It was 2 rooms, built by his own hands, strong enough to keep out the wind but not the memories. He entered, the single room dark and cool. He did not light a lamp. He sat on his cot, his Winchester across his knees, and watched the shadows lengthen until the room was pitch black. For 3 days, he did not leave. He drank water from his canteen and ate nothing. He was cleansing himself, waiting for the sickness of the killing to pass. On the 4th morning, his canteen was empty. The air was sharp, and the need for water finally drove him out. He took his rifle and began the 2-mile trek down the canyon to the only spring that never failed, a seep of clear water hidden beneath a granite overhang. He moved like a shadow, his moccasins making no sound on the gravel. He was halfway to the spring when he stopped. Voices. They were low, male, and they were not Apache. Elias melted into a thicket of manzanita, his body perfectly still. He waited. 3 men rode into the small clearing below him. They were white men, heavily armed, their horses showing the hard miles. They were not miners or ranchers. They wore their pistols tied down, and their eyes scanned the rocks with a professional hunger, bounty hunters. They dismounted, watering their horses at the spring. "This is the place that old Mexican described," one of them said, a heavy man with a greasy beard. "The breed's supposed to be up in these hills." $200, a younger, thinner man said, spitting tobacco juice. That is a lot of coin for one half-blood deserter. It ain't just desertion, the leader said. He was older, with a graying mustache and a flat, dead look in his eyes. The bounty notice is signed by a Major Grayson. Army business, they want him bad. Elias's blood went cold. Grayson, the name hit him like a physical blow. Major Grayson, the man who had given the order, the man who had looked Elias in the eye and said, "We are purging this land, Sergeant." The notice says he's a traitor, the bearded man said, filling his canteen. Says he betrayed his unit to the Apache. They want him brought in, alive if possible, but dead is just as good. How hard can it be to find one man? The young one asked. The leader let out a dry laugh. This ain't just any man. This is Red Hawk Kane. He was the Army's best scout. They say he can see a week into the future and smell a lie on the wind. He ain't to be trifled with. We find his cabin. We wait. We kill him when he comes home. They mounted up and rode on, heading up the canyon, directly toward his cabin. Elias did not move for a long time. His hands were clenched so tightly his nails bit into his palms. They were not just hunting a deserter. They were erasing a witness. Grayson was cleaning up his mess, and Elias was the last piece. He knew, with a sudden, chilling clarity, that the men he had killed on the road, Jedediah Cole and his partner, had likely been part of the same hunt. They were not robbing the stage. They were looking for him. Back in Drybone, Clara Monroe had tried to start her life. The town council had given her the keys to the one-room schoolhouse, a small building that smelled of dust and mice. She spent her days sweeping, scrubbing, and arranging the few battered books. The children were wary of her, their parents' suspicion poisoning their natural curiosity. She was the woman who had been saved by the savage. Her lip was healing, but the isolation was a fresh wound. She felt a profound and unsettling gratitude to the man who had saved her life. He was a killer. She had seen him kill, and it had been a terrible, efficient thing. But he had not harmed her. He had saved her from a fate she could not bear to imagine. She owed him a debt. After a week, she could no longer ignore it. She went to the general store and used her meager funds to buy coffee, a small sack of flour, and a jar of quinine pills, knowing the fever was common in these hills. She also bought a roll of clean bandages and a bottle of carbolic acid. These were practical gifts, a statement of thanks, not charity. She found Silas at the livery. "I need to find Mr. Kane," she said. The old driver stopped polishing a harness, his face falling into lines of worry. "Ma'am, you do not want to do that. He is not company. He is what he is. He is best left alone." "He saved my life. Silas, I am just bringing him some supplies to say thank you. It is the proper thing to do." He argued for 10 more minutes, but her quiet determination defeated him. He finally gave her directions, his words clipped and reluctant. "Follow the dry riverbed north into the high country. You will find a canyon that splits to the west. His cabin is up there. But I am begging you, Miss, you go before dark, and you do not stay. You just leave the things and you come back." She promised. She rented a placid, sway-backed mule and, with her basket tied to the saddle, she rode out of Drybone as the afternoon sun began to bleed toward the horizon. The ride was long, and the silence of the mountains was far more intimidating than the emptiness of the desert. The air grew thinner, cooler. She followed the directions, her heart pounding a nervous rhythm against her ribs. She found the cabin just as dusk was turning the rocks into deep purple shadows. It was perched on the edge of the canyon, stark and lonely. There was no smoke from the chimney, no light in the window. It looked abandoned. She dismounted, her hands shaking slightly. Mr. Kane," she called out, her voice sounding small in the vast emptiness. "My name is Clara Monroe, from the stagecoach." There was no answer. She walked closer, carrying the basket. "I brought you some things, to thank you." She reached the door. It was slightly ajar. She pushed it open. "Hello." Inside, The cabin was dark. Elias was not there. He had been watching the 3 bounty hunters from a high ridge for the entire day. He had watched them search his cabin, cursing and spitting when they found him gone. He had watched them take up positions in the rocks, setting a crude ambush. They were waiting for him. And now, this woman, this Eastern fool, had walked right into it. He was still a half-mile away, running, bounding down the rocks like a mountain goat, when he heard her call out his name.
There is someone at the cabin,
One of the hunters yelled.
It's a woman.
Maybe it's his woman, the leader said.
Hold your fire. Let's see what she does.
Clara stood in the doorway, her eyes adjusting to the gloom. The cabin was sparse, clean, a cot, a cold fireplace, a single table. She stepped inside, placing the basket on the table. She felt a sudden sense of trespass. She should not be here. She turned to leave. The leader of the hunters made his decision.
She will warn him. Take her.
Clara heard the scrape of a boot on rock. Just outside, she froze. Mr. Kane, she whispered again, a thread of real fear in her voice. A rifle shot exploded the quiet. The sound was deafening. Clara cried out, a sharp, choked sound, as a searing pain tore through her shoulder. She was thrown backward, falling against the table, scattering the contents of her basket. She slumped to the floor, her hand coming away from her shoulder covered in warm, dark blood. From the ridge above, Elias saw the muzzle flash. He saw her fall. A guttural roar, more animal than human, tore from his chest. He was no longer cautious. He was no longer the ghost. He was the hawk. He descended the last 100 yards in a controlled slide of gravel and dust, firing his Winchester from the hip. He was not aiming to kill. He was aiming to distract, to draw their fire.
He is here,
the bearded man yelled, spinning and firing wildly toward Elias.
He is up on the rocks.
Bullets pinged off the granite around Elias. He ignored them. He burst from the rocks and sprinted across the open ground to the cabin, a moving target in the deep twilight. He dove through the doorway, rolling as he hit the floor, coming up with his rifle ready.
He is in the cabin,
the leader roared.
Light it up.
A volley of gunfire ripped through the thin log walls. Wood splintered. Bullets thudded into the packed earth floor. Elias ignored it. He crawled to Clara. She was conscious, her eyes wide with terror and pain. You are a fool, he hissed, his voice a low, vicious snarl. Why did you come here? To thank you, she gasped, tears of pain streaming down her face. Get up. Can you move? She tried, but cried out and collapsed. The world was spinning. Elias grabbed her by her good arm, dragging her toward the back of the cabin. They will try to burn us out.
Kane,
the leader's voice called out, closer now. We saw the woman fall. Her blood is on your hands, not ours. Come out now, and we will give you a clean death. Stay here, Elias commanded Clara. He moved to the small, shuttered window at the back. He opened it a crack. He could see 2 of them, shadows moving against the rocks. The third was covering the front. He fired once. The bearded man yelped and dove for cover. He's at the back. Elias slammed the shutter. He ran back to Clara. She was fading, her skin clammy. He ripped her sleeve, exposing the wound. It was high on her shoulder, a ragged, bleeding hole. This will hurt, he said. He took his flask of whiskey from his belt, uncorked it, and poured the raw alcohol directly into the wound. Clara screamed, a high, thin sound that was swallowed by the night. Then, blessedly, she fainted. He worked with a desperate, practiced speed. He packed the wound with a clean rag from his own pack and bound it tightly with the bandages she had brought for him. He looked at her pale face. This was his fault. His past had finally come to claim him, and it had taken her first. He could hear the men outside, gathering brush. They were going to set the cabin on fire. He went to the fireplace, He kicked at a large, flat stone in the hearth, dislodging it. It revealed a black, narrow opening. A tunnel his mother had made him dig years ago, just in case. It led 50 yards to the safety of the dry arroyo. He went back to Clara. She was unconscious, a dead weight. He could not drag her. He would have to carry her. He lifted her into his arms. She was light, like a bird. Her head lolled back, then fell against his chest. She was burning with fever. She stirred, her eyes fluttering open. They were unfocused, milky in the darkness. She looked up at him, her mind adrift in a sea of pain. "It is so dark," she whispered, her voice a child's voice. Are you taking me home?" The word hit him again. Home, a place he had never had. He looked down at her, this strange woman who had walked into his life and set it on fire. He felt an ache in his chest, a sudden, powerful, and terrifying tenderness. He adjusted his grip, holding her more securely. He spoke, his voice a low rumble, rough with an emotion he could not name. It was a promise made to the ghosts, to her, to himself. "I have nothing to promise," he said, his voice thick. "I cannot promise fancy things, but if you fall, I will carry you home, every night." She did not hear him. Her eyes had closed again. Elias Kane turned, carrying the wounded teacher, and disappeared into the blackness of the earth, just as the first flames began to lick at the walls of his home. He was saving her for the second time. He knew with a dreadful certainty that he had just damned them both. The tunnel was a cold, tight darkness that smelled of damp earth and roots. Elias moved through it with a familiarity born of childhood fear, his mother's hand pulling him along during drills he had never understood until it was too late. Now, he was the one pulling. He carried Clara against his chest, her small, unconscious weight a strange and terrible burden. His rifle was slung over his back, scraping against the low ceiling. He emerged 50 yards from the cabin, in the black shadow of a deep, dry arroyo. Above them, the night sky was no longer black, but a sickening, flickering orange. The sound of the fire was a hungry roar, punctuated by the sharp cracks of his roof beams giving way. The bounty hunters were shouting, their voices triumphant, believing they had trapped him, that they were roasting him alive. Elias did not look back at the flames. A home was just wood. He had lost homes before. He laid Clara gently on the sandy floor of the wash, his hand going to her throat to feel the faint, rapid pulse. She was alive, but her breathing was shallow, and the heat from her skin was alarming. The bullet wound was bad, but the fever would kill her faster. He ripped a piece of his own shirt and soaked it with the last of his water. Bathing her face, her eyelids fluttered. "It is so hot," she murmured, her voice thick.
"The cabin is on fire,"
he said, his voice flat.
"We have to move."
Fire. She seemed to accept this, her mind too clouded by pain to understand the implications. He looked up at the canyon walls. The hunters would discover the tunnel eventually. Or, failing that, they would track him from the arroyo by morning. He had to put miles between them. And he had to find a place to hide, a place to fight the fever. He lifted her again. She was heavier this time, the reality of her sinking into him. He began to walk, moving south, away from the high country, deeper into the maze of canyons and washes that formed the foothills. He walked for hours. He did not feel his own exhaustion. He felt only the thrum of her fevered pulse against his ribs and the weight of the rifle on his back. He was a man with no home, no name, and a past that was now actively trying to kill him. He found the place just before dawn. It was a shallow cave, little more than an overhang of sandstone, hidden behind a curtain of desert willow. It was dry, and the sand on the floor was clean. He laid her down, using his rolled bedroll as a pillow. She was delirious. She spoke of green fields and a man named Arthur, of her father and a debt of $900. Elias listened. He had no choice. He was a keeper of her secrets now, just as she was, unwittingly, a prisoner of his. He cleaned the wound again with the last of the whiskey. It was inflamed, the edges an angry red. The bullet was still in there, lodged deep in the muscle of her shoulder. He could not get it out here, not without a clean knife and more light. He could only try to keep the fever at bay. He left her, his rifle in hand, and moved like a ghost to a place he knew, a small spring where the water was bitter with minerals but cold. He filled his canteen and gathered what herbs his mother had taught him to find willow bark for the fever, and a broad, pulpy leaf to mash into a poultice. For 2 days, he was her nurse. He was a man whose hands were built for the reins of a horse and the stock of a rifle. But he found a tenderness in them he did not know he possessed. He forced water between her cracked lips. He ground the willow bark with a stone and made her swallow the bitter paste. He sat for hours, a wetted rag on her forehead, listening to the desert sounds, his rifle always within reach. He was her guardian, her jailer. On the 3rd day, the fever broke. He had been watching the mouth of the cave, his body rigid, when he heard her voice, clear and weak. "Oh, where am I?" He turned. Her eyes were open, and they were lucid. The terror was gone, replaced by a profound, weary confusion. "A cave," he said. He moved to her side, offering the canteen. "You have been sick for 2 days. The fever is gone." She drank, wincing as she tried to sit up. The pain in her shoulder made her gasp. "The men! The cabin!" "The cabin is gone. Ashes," he said. "The men are still out there." She looked at him, really seeing him for the time since the stagecoach. His face was drawn with exhaustion, his blue eyes shadowed. A dark stubble covered his jaw. He looked dangerous, but not to her. "They shot me," she said, stating the fact. "They were shooting at me," he corrected. "You walked into their trap." The accusation hung in the air, but it was without heat. It was just the truth. "I came to thank you," she whispered, shame and pain mingling in her voice.
I brought bandages."
"I used them." He said, "You were right to bring them." A silence settled between them, the first comfortable silence they had shared. "Who are they?" she finally asked. Elias looked away, out at the sliver of blue sky visible from the cave.
"Men from my past. They are hunting me."
"Why?" His jaw tightened. "Because I will not stay dead." He would say no more. He stood up, his body all coiled muscle and tension. "I have to get supplies. The bullet is still in your shoulder. It needs to come out, and I need a clean blade and more whiskey. Do not leave the cave. Do not make a sound. I will be back by dark." He was gone before she could protest, blending into the landscape, leaving her alone with the silence and the throb of her shoulder. Far below, in Drybone, Major Grayson was holding court in the shaded common room of the town's only hotel. He was a man who looked misplaced in the West. His uniform was clean, his buttons polished, and his gray mustache was waxed at the tips. He looked like a banker, but his eyes were the color of a frozen lake, and they held an absolute absence of mercy. He was furious. The 3 bounty hunters, the survivors of the cabin fire, stood before him, hats in hand. "Gone," Grayson said, his voice a low, controlled hiss. "You let him get away. You had him trapped, and you let him walk out of a burning building."
"Major, we did not know about no tunnel,"
the leader whined.
"We searched the ashes. There was no bodies, just a burnt mule."
"He had the woman with him," Grayson said, tapping a riding crop against his polished boot. "The new schoolteacher."
"We seen her, sir,"
the man said eagerly. "He was carrying her when he ran." Grayson's eyes narrowed. This was a complication. A white woman. It made things messy, but it also provided an opportunity. "This is no longer a simple bounty hunt," Grayson said, his voice resonating with cold authority. "This man, Kane, is not just a deserter. He is a traitor of the worst kind. He has abducted a white woman, Miss Clara Monroe, and is holding her against her will. He is an animal, and he will be put down as such." He unrolled a new poster. The bounty had been doubled, $500, and now it had a new line, "And the safe return of Miss Monroe."
"You men are dismissed,"
Grayson said with contempt.
"I am bringing in my own trackers. I want Kane's head, and I want that woman back. I will not have a witness to army business running loose in this territory."
Clara, left alone in the cave, found her terror warring with a desperate boredom. The hours crawled by. The silence of the cave was heavy, oppressive. By late afternoon, she could not stand it. She felt stronger, the fever having burned away her weakness, leaving a clear, sharp ache. She needed to move. She needed to see the sun. She dragged herself to her feet. Her good arm pressed against the sandstone wall for support. She moved slowly, her body screaming in protest, until she was at the mouth of the cave. She stood behind the curtain of willow, breathing in the hot, sage-scented air. She could see the trail below, the one Elias had taken, and she heard them before she saw them, the jingle of a harness, the clop of shod horses. She froze, her heart leaping into her throat. It was not Elias. It was a group of 4 men. 3 were soldiers in dusty blue uniforms. The 4th was the man from the hotel in Drybone, the well-dressed man with the cold eyes she had seen giving orders when she first arrived. It was Major Grayson. They had a 4th man with them, an Apache scout, his eyes scanning the ground as they rode. Clara shrank back, pressing herself flat against the rock. The scout stopped, his gaze lifting, sweeping the canyon walls. He was looking right at the willows. Clara held her breath, convinced he could hear her heart. "What is it? Tonto?" Grayson asked, his voice impatient. The scout grunted. "Nothing. Old tracks. He is long gone." And Grayson swore. "He is here. I can feel it. He is like an animal. Kane. He thinks he can hide in the earth." He dismounted, walking to the edge of the wash. "He has the woman with him. He will be slow. He will need medicine. He will have to go to ground." He turned to one of the soldiers.
"When we find him, I want no mistakes. I do not care if the woman is in the way. I want Kane dead. He is the last witness. The business at Sand Creek. No, the creek by the border. It dies with him. Do you understand?"
"Sir," the soldier said. "And the woman?" Grayson's eyes were slivers of ice. "If she has been with a breed for this long, she is as tainted as he is. Expendable. No witnesses. No survivors." He mounted his horse. "Let's move. Check the next canyon." They rode on, disappearing around the bend, leaving a cloud of dust and a cold, profound terror in their wake. Clara slid down the rock wall, her body shaking so violently she could barely breathe. He had said it. No witnesses. He was going to kill them both. She was not a hostage. She was a liability. She was still sitting there, hugging her knees. When Elias returned, he appeared at the mouth of the cave as silently as the setting sun. He was carrying a small sack, and his face was grim. He saw her expression and stopped. "What is it?" "They were here," she whispered. "Soldiers, a man named Grayson. He wants you dead. He said you were the last witness." Elias's body went rigid. He dropped the sack.
"Grayson is here."
He said the business at the creek dies with you. He said I was expendable." The words came out in a rush. "He is going to kill us both. Elias—" A rage, cold and black, rose in Elias. It was a rage he had not felt since the day of the massacre. Grayson, here, not just sending hunters, but coming himself. The arrogance of the man, the absolute, unholy confidence. He turned to Clara. His face was a mask of fury. "You have to leave," he said, his voice a low growl. "What I cannot, they will find me. They will kill me." "They are hunting me," he bit out. "They will find you because you are with me. Go back to Drybone. Tell them I took you.
Tell them you escaped. Lie.
No, she said, her own fear turning to a sudden, surprising anger. I will not. I heard him. He called me tainted. He said I was expendable. Going back will not save me.
You are a white woman, Elias spat. They will not kill you in the street. Me, they will. You can hide behind your skin. I cannot.
The cruelty of his words stung her, but she saw the fear beneath them. It was not fear for himself. It was fear for her.
I am not leaving you,
she said, her voice shaking but firm.
Damn you, he roared.
He grabbed his rifle. I did not ask for this. I did not ask for you to come to my home. I did not ask for you to be shot. I do not need anyone dying for me. He was shouting, his voice echoing in the small cave. He was a man coming apart. He was trapped, not by Grayson, but by her, by this sudden, unwanted responsibility. And at that moment, the heavens opened. A summer monsoon, sudden and violent, burst over the canyon. Rain began to fall in solid, gray sheets, turning the dust to mud in seconds. Elias strode out of the cave, into the deluge. He needed the cold to clear his head. He stood in the pounding rain, his back to her, his shoulders slumped. Clara followed him. The cold water hit her instantly, soaking her thin dress, plastering her hair to her face. It hit her wounded shoulder like 1,000 needles, but she ignored it.
You are right, she shouted over the storm. You did not ask for this, but it is here, and I am here.
He turned on her, his face a mask of anguish.
Go back inside. You will get the fever again.
No. She stepped closer, her chin raised. You saved my life, and then you tell me to go and die. I will not be a ghost for you to feel guilty about. Elias Kane. He was breathing hard, the rain streaming down his face, mixing with the sudden, hot tears of a man who had not cried in a decade.
I cannot protect you.
The words were ripped from him. I cannot even protect myself. Everything I touch, I destroy. My home, my past. Now you, just go. He was in such pain. She could see it. A pain so deep it had carved canyons into his soul. He was not angry at her. He was angry at the world for putting her in his path. She stood directly in front of him, close enough to feel the heat coming off his body. She looked him straight in the eye. You throw your gun away, she said, her voice dropping, suddenly clear and calm in the heart of the storm. You shout at the sky. You tell me you do not need anyone dying for you. Fine, then who will you live for? The question struck him silent. He stared at her. The rain hammered down, a curtain of water isolating them from the rest of the world. Live for he had not lived for anything in years. He had only survived. He had existed, haunted by the dead, waiting for his own end. This woman, with her split lip and her ruined shoulder, her eyes full of a fire that matched the desert's, was asking him to live. It was the one thing he was terrified to do. To live was to feel was to care, and to care was to lose. He had no answer for her. He looked away, his gaze falling on the dark, smoking ruin of his cabin in the far distance, barely visible through the rain. Everything was gone. His home, his isolation, his simple, empty life. He was a man with no home. He was a man with a name he despised and a past that was 2 canyons over. And he was a man standing in the rain with a woman who refused to leave him. He had never been more lost. He had never been in more danger. And for the first time since he had walked away from the army, he was not entirely alone. The question hung in the downpour, a single, sharp point of light in the chaos. Who will you live for? Elias Kane had no answer. He stared at Clara, the rain plastering her dark hair to her face, her eyes holding his with a terrifying, unblinking challenge. He was a man defined by the dead. Living was a concept for other people, for those who had not seen what he had seen, done what he had done. The rain was a cold blessing. It was a flood, a baptism, washing away their tracks, washing away the blood, buying them time. Grayson and his men would be hunkered down, their hunt stalled. Elias grabbed her good arm, pulling her back into the shallow cave. The ground was already soaked. "We cannot stay here. The rain will stop, and they will find this place." "Where do we go?" she asked. She was shaking, her teeth chattering from the cold, but her gaze was steady. She was no longer a victim. She was a survivor. "South," he said, his voice flat. "Into the Sonoran. It is the last place they will expect. They think I am running for the border, or north to the Apache lands. We will go where only a fool would go." "And you are a fool. I am alive," he said, which was answer enough. "But first, the bullet." He lit a small, smokeless fire with the supplies he had brought. He took the bottle of whiskey, a newly purchased knife with a sharp, clean blade, and the bandages. "This will be the worst pain you have ever felt," he said, his voice devoid of comfort. He was not a doctor. He was a field soldier. "Bite on this." He handed her a piece of leather from his saddlebag. She looked at the knife, at his steady hands, and at the whiskey. "Will you get drunk first?" she asked, her voice tight. "No," he said. "The whiskey is for the wound, and for you, after—" He pressed her back against the cave wall, giving her the whiskey bottle. "Drink, as much as you can." She did, gagging on the raw, burning liquid. It hit her stomach like a hot coal, but a welcome numbness began to spread through her limbs. He did not wait. He took the knife, heated the blade in the fire until it glowed, and then, holding her shoulder in a grip of iron, he began to cut. Clara screamed into the leather, her entire body arching in a spasm of agony. It was not a clean cut, it was a search. Elias was sweating, his face a mask of concentration, his own pain reflecting hers. He probed the inflamed tissue, his fingers surprisingly gentle as they moved past the blade. "I have it," he whispered, more to himself than to her. He clamped the metal with a small tool and pulled. Clara's world went white, then black. When she woke up, she was lying on his bedroll. The wound was packed and tightly bound, and the cave smelled of burnt whiskey and seared flesh. Elias was sitting by the fire, his head in his hands, his rifle across his knees. He looked, for the first time, utterly exhausted. They rested for one day. The rain stopped, and the desert began to steam under the returning sun. Elias did not sleep. He sat and watched, listening. When the moon was high on the second night, he nudged her awake. "It is time." They moved south. Elias had stolen one of the bounty hunter's horses, the one left behind at his burned cabin. It was a strong bay, but it was not enough. He put Clara on its back, and he walked, his hand on the bridle, his rifle in the other. The Sonoran Desert was not the high country. It was a vast, flat oven. The sun was a physical enemy. It beat on them, leaching the water from their bodies, cracking their lips. The landscape was alien, a place of giant saguaro cacti that looked like tormented men, their arms raised to a merciless sky. The heat was a living thing, a presence that shimmered on the horizon, promising water that was not there. They traveled by night, hiding during the day in the slivers of shadow cast by rock formations. They ate jerky from his pack and drank sparingly from the canteen. The world was reduced to essentials: water, shadow, and the next step? On the fourth day, they found the settlement. It was not on any map, just a handful of adobe huts clustered around the only reliable well for 50 miles. A blacksmith's forge, cold now in the midday heat, stood at its center. This was a village of ghosts, a place for people who did not want to be found: Mexicans, a few displaced Tohono O'odham, and men running from the law. A man emerged from the largest hut. He was built like the anvil he worked, a barrel of a man with a thick black mustache and arms corded with muscle. He wore a leather apron and his face was kind, but his eyes were watchful. He saw Elias and his hand moved to the large hammer at his side. Then he recognized him. His face split into a wide, relieved grin. "Madre de Dios!" He boomed. "Elias,
I thought the desert had swallowed you. Mi amigo. Not yet, Tomas, Elias said. The tension in his shoulders eased by a fraction. Tomas came forward and embraced Elias, clapping him on the back. It was a gesture of such warmth that it startled Clara. Then Tomas saw her. His grin faded, replaced by a cautious curiosity. He looked at her pale face, her torn dress, and the blood-stained bandage on her shoulder. You have found trouble, my friend, Tomas said, his voice low, or it has found you. Both, Elias said. She needs a safe place, and I need help. Tomas nodded, his eyes taking in the entire situation. He saw the single horse, the exhaustion in Elias's face, the fear in Clara's. Mi casa es su casa, he said simply. Bring her inside. My wife, Maria, will see to her. Maria was a small, quiet woman who moved with a calm grace. She clucked in sympathy when she saw Clara's shoulder. She unwrapped the crude bandage, cleaned the healing wound with a herbal wash, and redressed it with a skill that spoke of long practice. She gave Clara a simple cotton shift to wear and a bowl of hot stew that tasted like heaven. For the first time in more than a week, Clara felt something close to safety. She slept in a small, clean room, the scent of chili and wood smoke lulling her into a deep, dreamless void. Elias, however, did not rest. He sat with Tomas by the cold forge, the stars thick and bright overhead. He explained, in clipped, short sentences, Grayson, the soldiers, the price on his head, the woman. Tomas listened, smoking a thin cigarillo. This Grayson, he said. He is a man who likes to tie up loose ends. He will not stop. I know, Elias said. My rifle. The firing pin is cracked. I need it fixed, and I need horses, strong ones. Tomas nodded. The rifle, I can fix. It will take a day. The horses, that is more difficult. But I have 2 Mustangs. Ones I broke for a man who never came to pay. They are yours. I cannot pay you, Tomas. Tomas laughed, a deep, rich sound. You will not pay me. Your mother. She fed my family for a whole winter when I was a boy. When the crops failed, she gave us corn when she had little herself. This is not a purchase. Elias, it is the settling of a debt. He looked at Elias, his expression serious. But the woman, she is not like you. She is not of this world. She is now, Elias said, his voice hard. She has to be. The next day, Eli's patience returned. But it was a new, focused kind of patience. It was the patience of a teacher, while Tomas worked at the forge, sparks flying as he mended the rifle. Elias took Clara to a dry wash, away from the village. He had procured a small, lighter revolver from Tomas. He pressed it into Clara's hand. You need to learn. I have never fired a gun, she said, her hand trembling. You will, he said. This is not the East. There are no police to call. There is only this. He tapped the metal of the gun. It is a tool, no different from a hammer. You must learn to use it. He was not gentle. He was methodical. He showed her how to load the chambers, how to hold the weapon with both hands to steady her aim, how to pull the trigger with a slow, steady squeeze, not a jerk. She fired. The sound was shocking, the recoil stinging her palms. The bullet kicked up dust 10 feet to the left of the can he had set on a rock. Again, he said, his voice flat. She fired again and again. She missed every time. Frustration and the old, familiar sting of failure brought tears to her eyes. I cannot do this. You can, he said. He did not comfort her. He did not pat her shoulder. He simply stood beside her, his presence an unyielding wall. You are thinking about the noise. You are thinking about the kick. You are afraid of it. Do not be afraid of it. Control it. Aim. Breathe out. Squeeze. Again. She wiped her tears with her good arm. She was angry now. Angry at him. Angry at the gun. Angry at this whole, God-forsaken land. She raised the pistol, aimed, breathed out, and squeezed. The can jumped off the rock. A small, sharp sound of triumph escaped her. She looked at him, expecting praise. Elias merely nodded, reloading the gun. "Good, now ride." Her education on the horse was just as brutal. The mustangs Thomas had given them were half wild, their eyes full of fire. Elias put her on a sorrel mare that had a mean streak. "She knows you are afraid," he told her, adjusting the stirrups. "Do not be. Show her you are the boss. Grip with your knees, not your hands. The reins are for guiding, not for holding on." She spent the afternoon being thrown, catching herself, and climbing back on, her body aching, her new wound screaming in protest. Elias just watched, his arms crossed, offering only clipped instructions. By sunset, she was staying in the saddle, her knuckles white, her face grim, but she was riding. That night, Thomas gave them saddlebags filled with food, 2 full canteens, and the repaired rifle. "Go east," he advised, "toward the New Mexico territory. It is lawless, but there are fewer soldiers. Grayson will think you are running to Mexico. You may find a place to disappear." They left before dawn, 2 small figures heading into a vast red emptiness. They were no longer a man and his burden. They were a grim, determined pair. The desert was relentless. The heat was a physical weight. The sweat dried on their skin, leaving crusts of salt. The silence was broken only by the wind and the plod of the horses. On the 3rd day, they saw the riders. 2 of them. They were not soldiers. They were prospectors, or maybe bandits. They saw Elias and Clara, a lone man and a woman, and their eyes lit with a greedy, ugly light. They rode to intercept, their rifles held casually across their saddles. "Well now," the taller one said, a man with a tobacco-stained beard, "look what we found. A man traveling with his pretty wife." Elias reined in his horse. He sat perfectly still. "We do not want trouble. We are just passing through." "Oh, we ain't trouble," the second man, a younger, wiry one, said with a laugh. "We're just friendly." He nudged his horse closer to Clara's. "Maybe your wife would like some different company." Clara's hand instinctively went to the revolver at her hip. "Do not," Elias said, his voice a low command, not moving his gaze from the men. The tall man's eyes narrowed. "Hand over your guns, friend, and the woman, and we will let you walk away." Elias sighed. It was a faint sound, like the brush of wind over sand. "I gave you a chance." The transformation was so fast Clara almost missed it. One moment, Elias was a tired man on a horse. The next, he was a weapon. He did not draw his pistol. His rifle, which had been resting across his lap, was suddenly at his shoulder. He fired. The tall man was thrown from his saddle, a neat dark hole in his chest. The wiry man, stunned, fumbled for his own gun. Elias had already levered another round. The second shot was just as final. The man slumped forward over his horse's neck. It was over in less than 3 heartbeats. 2 men were dead. Silence. Clara stared, her mouth open, her heart hammering. She had seen him kill before, but this was different. This was not a desperate fight. This was an execution. It was the coldest, most efficient thing she had ever witnessed. This was the warrior, the Red Hawk. Elias did not look at her. He dismounted, his movements economical. He walked to the first body and retrieved the man's canteen, checking its weight. He took the rifle. He did the same to the second man, also taking his ammunition. He was not a killer. He was a survivor, scavenging. When he returned to his horse, he finally looked at her. His eyes were not cold. They were full of a terrible, burning self-hatred. He had just saved her life, and he loathed himself for how he had done it. That night, they made a cold camp. They did not dare light a fire. The smell of the dead men and their horses, which Elias had driven off, had attracted other predators. A pack of desert wolves circled their camp. their eyes glowing green in the moonlight, their howls rising and falling, a song of hunger. They sat back to back, Elias with his rifle, Clara with her revolver. She was shaking, but she held the gun steady. They did not speak, they just listened. Two small points of human warmth in a vast, predatory darkness. The sun rose, and the wolves melted away. The tension of the night, unresolved, snapped in the daylight. "You enjoyed it," Clara said, her voice hoarse. It was not an accusation. It was a statement. Elias was checking the horse's hooves. He froze. It was a thing that had to be done. "No," she said, walking up to him. "It was more than that. I saw your face. You were good at it. You were perfect, and you hate yourself for it." He stood up, his height towering over her. His face was a thundercloud. "What do you know about it? What do you know about anything but your books and your chalk?" "I know what I see," she retorted, her fear gone, replaced by the same anger that had helped her shoot the can. "I see a man who was trained to be a killer, and he is so good at it that he cannot stand to be himself." "You are right," he hissed, his voice raw. "They trained me. They took the Apache in me and they sharpened it. They made me a weapon, and then they pointed me at my own people. And I did it. So do not stand there and tell me what I am. I am a monster, and you should have run away when you had the chance." He had never said so much. The confession, ripped from his gut, left him shaking. Before she could answer, the world changed. The wind, which had been still, suddenly gusted, picking up sand. A low, humming sound filled the air. To the south, the horizon had disappeared, replaced by a solid wall of churning, red dust. "Sandstorm," Elias said, his anger instantly vanishing, replaced by urgent command. "Get behind that rock, now. Cover your face. Do not breathe the dust." He pulled the horses into the lee of a large granite boulder, forcing them to lie down. He and Clara huddled beside them, pulling their blankets over their heads. The storm hit them like a physical blow. The wind howled, a high, screaming shriek. The air became thick, unbreathable. Sand forced its way into everything, stinging their skin, grating between their teeth. It was like being buried alive. For hours, they just endured. There was no conversation. There was only the roar of the wind and the desperate, suffocating closeness. Then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. The wind died. The air cleared. Elias and Clara emerged from their dusty tomb, coughing, spitting out mud. The world was transformed. It was scoured clean. The landscape new. Every track, every trace of their journey, erased. In the quiet, raw sunlight of the new morning, Clara saw it. Huddled in the protection of the same rock that had sheltered them, a small, battered, prickly pear cactus was in bloom. Despite the wind, despite the sand, it had produced a single, waxy, brilliant yellow flower. She pointed, her finger trembling. "Look!" Elias looked, his eyes fixed on the impossible, fragile blossom. "See?" Clara whispered, her voice hoarse. "Whatever wants to live will always find a way." Elias Kane looked at the flower. Then he looked at her, this woman of chalk and books, who had been shot, poisoned, and buried alive. She was still standing. She was still fighting. She was, he realized, the answer to the question she had asked him in the rain. He did not say it. He did not know how. He just held her gaze, and for the first time, he did not look away. He nodded, and they prepared to ride on. The sandstorm had scoured the world, leaving it raw and new. It had also, Elias knew, bought them time. Grayson's trackers. Even the Apache scout would find no trail in this freshly swept landscape. But it had also taken its toll. They were low on water, and the desert east of the storm was a broken, brutal country of high mesas and shattered rock. He led them on, pushing the horses. Clara did not complain. She rode with a grim endurance that he had come to respect.
She was no longer the woman from the stagecoach. The desert was burning away her old life, leaving something hard and bright, like the cactus flower. Elias was searching for something. He kept his eyes on the formations of the rocks, reading the land not as a scout, but as a man searching for a memory. On the second day after the storm, he found it, a narrow opening in a high canyon wall, almost invisible, hidden by a rock slide. "Where are we going?" Clara asked, her voice hoarse from the dust. "A place I know," he said, "a place to rest, to be safe, for a little while." He dismounted, leading his horse through the tight passage. Clara followed. The passage opened up into a small, hidden valley, a bowl of green in the middle of the red rock, watered by a spring that ran from the cliffside. It was silent, but it had not always been. The valley was full of the ghosts of wickiups, the traditional Apache homes, their skeletons, made of bent willow and scrub oak, stood against the sky. Some were collapsing, others were just dark circles on the ground, the earth still scorched from a fire long ago. It was an abandoned village. Clara dismounted, her eyes taking in the profound sadness of the place. "What is this?" Elias did not answer. He walked, as if in a trance, toward the center of the village, to the largest of the ruined structures. He stopped and touched a single, fire-blackened support pole. "This was my mother's home," he said. His voice was quiet, stripped of its usual roughness. "This was my home." He looked at the ruins, but he was seeing something else. He was seeing it as it had been, full of life, the smell of roasting corn, the sound of children laughing, the barking of dogs. "What happened?" Clara asked, stepping up beside him. He looked away, his gaze moving to the small, overgrown graves at the edge of the clearing. "What always happens," he said. "The soldiers came." He turned, his back to the ruin, his face a mask of cold memory. "My people, the Chiricahua, we were told we had peace. The Great Father in Washington sent us papers. We were told to stay here, in this valley, where we had always lived. We were told we would be safe." He kicked at a rusted piece of metal in the dust. It was the rim of a cavalry bucket. "They came at dawn, not soldiers from the local fort. These were different, volunteers, led by a man who believed the only good Apache was a dead one. They were not here to move us. They were here to cleanse." Clara watched his face, her heart aching. He was not speaking to her. He was speaking to the ghosts. They burned the cornfields first. Then they set fire to the wickiups. They shot anyone who ran out. The women. His voice dropped, becoming thick. The children. They killed the children while they were still in their sleeping blankets. They called it pacification. They called it securing the territory. "Elias," she whispered, her hand wanting to reach for him, but she did not dare.
"They call us savages,"
he spat, his voice suddenly full of a venom she had never heard. "Because we fight for this land. But I have never seen an Apache warrior ride into a white town and murder babies in their beds. They call us the animals, but they are the ones who hunt for sport." He leaned heavily against the scorched pole, his head down. Clara saw him wince, a sharp intake of breath that was not just emotional. His left side, just above his belt, his shirt was stiff with old, dark blood. "You are hurt," she said, her voice sharp with alarm. He straightened, waving her off. "It is nothing. A graze from the fight with those bandits. It is fine." "It is not fine," she insisted. She stepped closer, ignoring his defensive posture. "Let me see. You taught me to shoot. You taught me to ride. Let me be the one who knows something useful now." He hesitated. He was a man who had never allowed anyone to tend to him. To be tended to was to be weak. But he looked into her eyes, and he saw not pity, but the same steady competence he had tried to instill in her. He nodded. Once. He sat on a flat rock and pulled his shirt free from his trousers. The wound was long and shallow, a deep graze where the bandit's bullet had torn along his ribs. It was not deep, but it was inflamed. The edges an angry, weeping red. It was festering. "You are a fool," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "This could kill you faster than any bullet." She went to her saddlebag. She still had the small housewife sewing kit from her life in the East. She took her sharpest needle and a length of good silk thread. She cleaned the wound with the last of the whiskey, the same way he had done for her. He did not even flinch, though she saw the muscles in his jaw bunch. "This will not be pleasant," she said, threading the needle. "Get on with it," he said. She began to stitch the torn flesh back together. Her hands, which had once trembled holding a pistol, were now perfectly steady. She was a teacher. She was a tailor. This was just a different kind of mending. Elias watched her. He did not watch the needle. He watched her face. Her brow was furrowed in concentration. Her lower lip caught between her teeth. Her dark hair fell forward, shielding her expression. He felt the small, sharp pricks of the needle, the pull of the thread binding his skin. It was an odd sensation. It was pain, but it was a healing pain. It was the first time in his adult life that another human being had touched him with the intent to heal, rather than to harm or to take. He had always been the one to set his own bones, to stitch his own cuts, to endure alone. He felt a strange, unwelcome warmth spread through his chest, a vulnerability that terrified him. He looked away, up at the circle of sky, and for a moment, he let himself be weak. He let her take care of him. When she was finished, she tied the knot and snipped the thread. "There," she said, her voice professional, like a teacher who had just finished a difficult lesson. "It is not my finest work, but it will hold." "Thank you," he said. The words felt foreign on his tongue. They made a camp in the ruins of his mother's wickiup. For the first time in weeks, they were not running. They were hiding. The hidden valley was a sanctuary, full of sad memories, but safe. The spring provided clean water, and Elias hunted, bringing back 2 rabbits. That night, they sat by a small, smokeless fire. The intimacy of her tending to him had shifted something between them. The silence was no longer a void, but a shared space. "You never told me about your mother," Clara said softly. "She was Apache," Elias said, staring into the flames. "She was strong. She taught me to see. She taught me to listen. She died of a white man's sickness 2 years before the soldiers came. She was lucky. And your father, a white trapper. He had blue eyes. That is all I have from him. He left when I was a child. He looked at me and my mother, and he decided we were not worth the trouble." He fell silent, and Clara knew not to push. She had just seen the 2 halves of his life, the Apache mother who had given him strength, and the white father who had given him his eyes, and his first taste of betrayal. The peace lasted for 3 days. It was a false peace. On the 4th morning, Clara woke up shivering. She was wrapped in her bedroll, but a deep, penetrating cold had settled into her bones. Elias, already awake, touched her forehead. "She was burning." "No," he said, his voice flat with a sudden, cold dread. "It was the fever, the malaria, from the mosquitoes at the spring. It came on fast. By midday, she was delirious, her teeth chattering. She was freezing, and yet her skin was on fire." Elias worked with a grim desperation. He gave her the last of their quinine, but it did nothing. He bathed her face with cold water from the spring. She did not know him. She was back in the East, arguing with her father, begging a man named Arthur not to leave. Elias recognized the signs. He had seen this fever on the trail. It killed strong men in days. It would kill her in hours. The valley, their sanctuary, was now a trap. The spring that gave them water was also poisoning them. They had to leave. He knew of a place, a small, half-ruined Spanish mission 2 days' ride to the east, closer to the New Mexico line. An old priest lived there, a man who grew herbs and kept medicines. It was their only chance. He packed their supplies with frantic speed. He hauled Clara to her feet,
trying to put her on the sorrel mare. She was a dead weight, slumping forward, unable to grip the reins. He tried to tie her to the saddle, but she lolled dangerously, her breathing shallow, choked. "No," he grunted. It would not work. She would fall. She would die on the trail. He looked at her, a small, broken thing, shivering in his arms. He looked at the horse. He looked at their supplies, and he made his choice. He pulled her back into his arms. He would carry her. He cached his rifle and most of his supplies under a rock ledge, marking it with a stone. He took only one canteen of water, the revolver Tomas had given him, and the bedroll. He wrapped Clara tightly in the blanket, and then he did what he had not done since he was a boy carrying his younger brother. He lifted her onto his back, her arms draped bonelessly over his shoulders, her head resting against his neck. He began to walk, leaving the horses, leaving the village, leaving everything. The next 24 hours were a blur of sun and shadow, of rock and sand. He walked. He did not run. He just walked, a steady, ground-eating pace. His legs burned. The muscles in his back and shoulders screamed. Clara was a terrible, shifting weight. Sometimes she would moan, her hot breath against his ear. Night fell. He did not stop. The moon was a pale sliver, giving just enough light. He kept walking, his eyes on the horizon. Clara began to toss in her delirium. She was afraid. "It is so dark, she whimpered. "I am falling." "You are not falling," Elias grunted, his voice a raw rasp. "I have you." To keep her calm, to keep himself sane, to keep the rhythm of his steps, he began to hum. It was a low, repetitive chant, a melody from a life he had almost forgotten. He had not sung it since his mother died. It was the song she had sung to him, a lullaby about the hawk, the cane, finding its way home in the dark. He walked all night. He walked as the sun rose, a brutal red eye that offered no warmth, only heat. His water was almost gone. His legs were numb, moving only by memory. He collapsed in the meager shade of a mesquite tree. He slid Clara from his back, laying her gently on the ground. She was paler, her breathing so shallow he could barely see her chest move. She opened her eyes. They were milky, unfocused, but she saw him. "Elias," she whispered. Her voice was like dry leaves. "You have to leave me. He is coming. Grayson, you can get away." "Be quiet," he said, his throat raw. "No," she insisted, a flicker of her old spirit. "You cannot carry me. I am so tired. Just let me go home." He looked at her, this impossible woman. She had been shot, run, and now was dying of fever, and she was telling him to save himself. He leaned down, his face close to hers. His own face was a mask of dust and dried sweat, his eyes red-rimmed and burning. He remembered the promise he had whispered in the dark of his burning cabin, a promise he had made to himself, not to her. Now, he made it to her. "I have nothing to promise," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he refused to name. "I cannot promise you fancy things. Clara, I cannot promise you a safe life. I cannot even promise you will live to see the sunset." She stared at him, her gaze sharpening, focusing on his. "But I will carry you home," he said, his voice fierce, a vow sworn to the desert, to the sky, to her. "Every night, till I die, you will not fall. I will not let you." Her eyes filled with tears, which tracked clean paths through the dust on her cheeks. She raised one shaking hand and touched his jaw. It was the first time she had touched him in tenderness. "Elias," she whispered, and she closed her eyes. He thought she was gone, but her breathing was deeper. The promise had been an anchor. He lifted her again and walked the last 5 miles to the mission. An old priest, Father Esteban, found them at the gate. He saw the half-Apache man carrying the white woman, and he saw the shadow of death on them both. He did not ask questions.
He simply opened the gate. They stayed at the mission for a week. Esteban had quinine. He had cool water and goat's milk. He had a small, clean, whitewashed room. Elias did not leave her side. He sat in a chair, his revolver on his lap, and he watched her fight. The fever broke on the 3rd day. On the 4th, she ate broth. On the 5th, she sat up. They sat in the mission's small, dusty courtyard, in the shade of an olive tree. The peace was thick, a blanket. "You sang to me," she said quietly. Elias looked away, embarrassed. "You were delirious." "No," she said. "I heard it. It was beautiful." They were silent. The fear was gone. The running was, for a moment, over. What was left was something new and fragile. "When you are strong," Elias said, his voice low, "we will go north to Montana. I heard there is good land there, grass, trees, enough space for a man to be forgotten." "We?" she asked, looking at him. "I can raise horses," he said, ignoring her question. "And you can teach children to read if you want." She smiled, a small, real smile. "I would like that, Elias." It was a promise, not of passion but of possibility. A life built from the ashes, a home made of simple, everyday work. Their peace was shattered 2 days later. A man rode into the mission. He was not a soldier. He wore dusty civilian clothes, but he moved with the stiff precision of the army. He asked Father Esteban for the man named Cain. Elias met him in the courtyard, his hand resting on the grip of his revolver. The man was older, his face weary. "Sergeant Cain," he said, his voice low. "You might not remember me. Corporal Evans, I served with you before the creek." Elias remembered him, a quiet man, a good soldier. "I remember. Corporal, what do you want?" "I am on my way to California," Evans said, not meeting his eye. I am done with the army. I came to warn you." Elias went still. "It is Grayson." Evans said, "He is obsessed. He is using the army telegraph lines. He has put a bounty on your head, $1,000. Elias's blood went cold. "He is telling everyone you are a traitor, that you abducted the new school teacher, that you are leading an Apache war party." "He is lying," Elias said. "Of course he is," Evans said, finally looking up. His eyes were full of shame. "He is trying to erase you, Sergeant. He cannot have any witnesses to what he did at that creek. He wants you dead, and he wants the woman dead." He told his men, "No survivors." "Why are you telling me this?" Elias asked. "Because," Evans said, his voice breaking, "what he ordered us to do that day, it was not war, it was murder. You were the only one who had the honor to walk away. I just ran." The corporal mounted his horse. "Godspeed, Elias Cain. He is not just hunting you, he is hunting her, too. He will not stop." The man rode out, leaving Elias standing in the sun, the blessed, peaceful quiet of the mission suddenly feeling like a tomb. He went back to the small room. Clara was packing their few supplies, humming the small tune he had taught her. She looked up when he entered, her face bright. She saw his expression, and her smile died. "What is it?" "Grayson," Elias said, his voice flat and dead. "He is close. The bounty is $1,000. For both of us. We have to leave. Now." The warning from Corporal Evans fell into the silence of the mission courtyard. A stone dropped into a deep well. Clara's humming stopped, the small, fragile peace of the past week, a peace built of broth and shared silence, shattered. "Leave!" Clara's voice was a whisper. She looked at the small bundle of their supplies, now a symbol of a future that had just been stolen. "Leave where?" "Elias, we already ran. He found us here. He will find us in Montana. He will find us anywhere." Elias looked at her. He saw the strength that had returned to her face, the color in her cheeks, the way her shoulder, though stiff, was healing. He saw the woman who had stitched his side, the woman who had looked at a desert flower and spoken of survival. He remembered her voice in the rain, a challenge that had haunted him for weeks. Who will you live for? Running was his mother's way. Fighting was his father's. He had been torn between them all his life. No, he said, his voice low. Clara looked at him, confused. No. You are right. We cannot run anymore. He turned to face the courtyard gate, as if he could see Grayson on the horizon. Running is just a slower way to die. He has a name for me now, a traitor, a kidnapper. He has the law on his side, and $1,000. He will not stop. Not until my head is on his desk, and you are buried where no one can find your body. Then, what do we do? She asked, her hands twisting in the fabric of her skirt. We cannot fight him. He has soldiers. He has a dozen men, maybe, Elias said, his mind working, the old, cold clarity of the scout returning. But he is arrogant. He is a man who believes his own lies, and he is hunting one man. It is suicide, Elias, she pleaded, stepping toward him, her hand reaching for his arm. No, he said, turning to her. Suicide is letting him choose the ground, letting him hunt us until we are tired and hungry and make a mistake. We have been prey. It is time to be the predator. You are talking about killing him, she said, the words tasting like ash. You are talking about an ambush. I am talking about ending it, he said, his voice hard. I am talking about living. The conflict in her was terrible. She had just found a flicker of hope, a plan for a life in a green valley, a life of teaching children and raising horses. It was a simple, clean dream. This was the opposite. This was blood and smoke and the man she had seen kill without blinking. No, she said, her voice breaking. I will not let you throw your life away. Not for me, not for this. It is not for you, he said, though they both knew it was a lie. It is for me. He murdered my mother's people. He burned my home. He forced me to be a part of it. He will not stop until every witness is erased. We are the last witnesses. Clara, he will not let us live. Then we will hide, she cried, her voice rising. I will not be the reason you die. He stepped closer, his gaze softening for just a moment. He touched her cheek, his fingers rough against her skin. It was the first time he had touched her with such open affection. And I will not be the reason you spend the rest of your life running. I promise to carry you home. I cannot do that if I am always looking over my shoulder. He saw the fight in her eyes, the terror, and the resolve. She saw the man he was, not the broken scout, but the warrior. He will not expect it, Elias said, his voice dropping, pulling her into the conspiracy. He is hunting a ghost. He is hunting a man running scared. I will not be that man. I will be the man he trained me to be. She searched his face, her heart hammering. She was losing the man who sang lullabies and finding the man who survived. Perhaps, she realized, they had always been the same. She took a deep, shuddering breath. What do you need? I need you to be safe, he said. My only safety is with you, she countered, her voice fierce, echoing her words from the cave. He called me expendable. My life is tied to yours. Elias, if you die, I am next. I would rather die fighting beside you than hiding in a hole. He looked at her for a long moment, seeing the stubborn, impossible strength that matched his own. He nodded. Once. Then stay with the horses. But you do what I say, exactly what I say. He turned. I need friends. He left her with Father Esteban, with a promise to return in 3 days. He rode the sorrel mare hard, by night, avoiding the trails, using the high, rocky ridges. He rode back to the only allies he had in the world. He found Thomas at his forge, the rhythm of his hammer a heartbeat in the quiet village. The blacksmith saw Elias, and his face, already grim, darkened. You should not be here. Amigo, soldiers have been through, not Grayson, but others. asking questions about a half-breed and a white woman.
That is why I am here. Elias said, I am done running. I am going to end it. I am going to kill Grayson.
Thomas stopped his hammer. He looked at Elias as if he were a madman.
That is not a fight, Elias. That is an execution. Yours.
He will not stop, Elias said, his voice quiet, intense. He will hunt me, and when he is done, he will come here. He will find out you helped me. He leaves no witnesses. Thomas, your wife, your children, they are not safe as long as he is alive.
The color drained from Thomas's face. He looked at his small adobe hut, where his wife was singing to their new baby. He turned back to Elias, his eyes hard. What is the plan? I need a place, a trap, and I need more guns.
I have my rifle, Thomas said.
But we are 2 men. No, Elias said, we are not. Together, they rode deep into the Sierra Madre, to a hidden canyon Elias's mother had shown him. Here, a small band of Chiricahua survivors lived, men and women who had escaped the massacres, clinging to the old ways. They were led by a man named Cale, an old warrior with eyes like chips of black obsidian. They saw Elias, the half-breed who had worn the blue coat, and their hands went to their knives. Elias dismounted, Thomas at his side. He spoke in Apache, his voice formal, his words carrying the weight of his memory. I am Elias Kane, son of Nalin. I am the man called Red Hawk. We know who you are, Cale said, his voice like gravel. You were the army's dog.
I was, Elias said, unflinching. I was a fool. I wore their coat, and I led the man who murdered your brothers to the creek. I did not know. I was betrayed.
We do not care about your betrayal, another warrior said.
You will care about this, Elias said. The man who gave the order, the man who watched your children die. He is here. His name is Grayson, and he hunts me now. He hunts me to silence the last witness. A new, dangerous silence fell over the small camp.
Grayson,
Cale whispered. The name a curse. He rides with soldiers. Elias said, he is hunting me. I will lead him to a trap. I will be the bait, but I need arrows. I need warriors who know how to be ghosts. Cale looked at Elias, at his blue eyes, and at the Apache determination in his jaw. You would fight the blue coats. I will fight this man, Elias corrected. This is not war. This is justice. This is for our mothers.
Cale stared at him, then gave a sharp nod. We are few, 10 warriors, but we will fight. Where do we spill his blood?
Black Mesa, Elias said. It is a box canyon, a perfect trap. The plan was simple. It was brutal. Elias would be the bait. He would ride into the open, letting one of Grayson's trackers see him. He would lead them into the narrow canyon of Black Mesa. The 10 Apache warriors would be high in the rocks, silent. Tomas and Elias would take a sniper's position on the far ledge. Clara would be hidden with the horses in a small, concealed arroyo a half-mile back, with one warrior to guard her. 3 days later, the trap was set. The air was still, hot, the volcanic rock of the mesa radiating heat. Elias sat on his horse, waiting. He did not have to wait long. He saw the dust first, then the glint of sun on a rifle barrel, a dozen riders, blue uniforms, and at their head, Major Grayson, his back straight, his face confident. Elias let them see him. He panicked, firing one wild shot and disappearing into the mouth of the canyon.
He is in the trap,
Grayson yelled, his voice triumphant. After him $500 to the man who brings me his head.
The soldiers charged into the canyon, a dusty, noisy column of men. They were halfway in when the first arrow flew. A soldier screamed, clutching his throat, and toppled from his horse.
Ambush! A sergeant yelled. The canyon erupted. Gunfire from the rocks, arrows from the shadows. The Apache warriors, moving from boulder to boulder, looked like 3 times their number.
The soldiers, trapped in the narrow canyon floor, panicked. Horses screamed and reared. Men fired wildly at shadows. From his ledge, Elias was not panicking. He was cold. He was the sergeant again. He aimed his Winchester. He breathed out. He squeezed. A soldier fell. He levered another round. Breathed. Squeezed. Another. Beside him, Thomas was firing his own rifle. A steady, rhythmic boom. "This is good, amigo!" he yelled over the din. But Grayson was a veteran. He was not a coward. He saw the chaos. He saw his men dying. "Get to cover," he roared, dismounting, pulling 3 men behind a rockfall. He realized the attacking force was small, but perfectly placed. He needed to change the battle. "Flank them," he yelled to 2 of his men. "Get up on that ridge. Find the shooters." Elias saw the men break, running for a game trail that led up the canyon wall. "They are flanking us," he said to Thomas. "Stop them." They both turned their fire to the 2 soldiers, but Grayson's move was a distraction. He had seen where the heaviest fire was coming from. He signaled to 3 other men. "Circle back, wide, find their horses, find who is guarding them." The main battle raged for 10 more minutes. It was a stalemate. The Apache were ghosts. Elias and Tomas were protected, but Grayson's men were disciplined. They had found cover. Then came the shout that stopped Ellis's heart. "Major, we have her. We have the woman." The gunfire stopped. The silence that fell was more terrible than the noise. Elias stood up. Down in the canyon, Grayson stepped out from behind the rocks. His men were dragging Clara, her hands bound, her revolver kicked away. The Apache warrior who had guarded her was dead on the ground. Grayson smiled. It was a terrible, triumphant expression. He strode to Clara, grabbing her by the hair, and yanked her in front of him. He pressed the muzzle of his service revolver to her temple. "Sergeant Elias Kane," Grayson's voice echoed off the rocks. "A predictable trap from a predictable savage. Show yourself, or the woman dies right now, your choice. Traitor." Clara was pale, her body shaking, but her eyes were fixed on the ledge. "Elias, do not!" she screamed. Grayson struck her across the face, a hard, sharp blow. "Silence, you!" "Amigo, no," Tomas whispered, grabbing Elias's arm. "It is a trick." "Let me go, Tomas," Elias said, his voice dead. He stepped into the open, his rifle held at his side. "Let her go, Grayson." "Throw down the rifle," Grayson yelled, his arm locking around Clara's throat. "All of it. The pistol, the knife, or I will paint this canyon with her brains." Elias looked at Grayson. He looked at Clara. He saw the blood on her lip, the terror in her eyes. He slowly, deliberately, unslung his rifle and placed it on the rock. He unbuckled his gun belt and let it fall. "The knife in your boot. Sergeant, I trained you. Remember, I know all your filthy little tricks." Elias hesitated. Then he reached down, pulled the knife, and threw it onto the rocks. "Good," Grayson sneered. "Now come down, hands high, walk slowly." Elias began the slow, agonizing climb down the rock face. His hands raised. He felt the rifles of the remaining soldiers trained on his back. He reached the canyon floor. He was 20 yards from them. "You really are a fool, Kane," Grayson said, his voice full of satisfied contempt. He still held Clara, a human shield. "All that Apache honor, all that white guilt, it makes you weak. You should have stayed dead." "This is between us, Grayson," Elias said, his voice dangerously calm. He took a slow step forward. "Let her go." "Oh no, she is the final piece," Grayson said. "She is the witness to your treason. When my men find your bodies, the story will be complete. The savage half-breed murders his white hostage and is killed resisting arrest. My report is already written." Elias looked at Clara, his eyes locked on hers. He did not nod. He did not blink. He just looked at her, pouring all of his will, all of his life, into that single gaze. "Trust me, be ready." It is over, Major, Elias said, taking one more step. On your knees, traitor, a soldier yelled. Grayson laughed. Yes, on your knees. I want you to beg. I will not beg, Elias said, and it is over for you. He moved. It was not a lunge. It was not a charge. It was an explosion. It was the fastest thing Clara had ever seen. He was not aiming for Grayson. He was aiming for the gun. Before Grayson could react, before his finger could even tighten, Elias's left hand shot out. He did not grab Grayson's wrist. He grabbed the gun itself, wrapping his hand around the barrel and the cylinder, covering it completely. With his right hand, he seized Grayson's wrist. He used Grayson's own strength against him, twisting the weapon, forcing it away from Clara's head and jamming it hard into Grayson's own chest. Grayson, enraged and surprised, reflexively pulled the trigger. The explosion was muffled, a wet, heavy thump. The bullet tore through the flesh and bone of Elias's left palm. It exited the back of his hand and slammed directly into Grayson's heart. The Major's eyes went wide, a look of profound, stupid surprise on his face. He looked at Elias. He looked at the smoking, ruined mess of Elias's hand, still clamped around the pistol. He looked down at the dark, spreading stain on his own uniform. His arm went slack. He released Clara. He fell to his knees, his lips moving, and then fell face down in the dust. He was dead. The canyon was silent for one heartbeat. Then, from the ridge, Tomas yelled, "Now!" The Apache opened fire. The remaining soldiers, their leader dead, their will broken, turned and ran. One of them, scrambling for his horse, turned and fired one last, panicked shot toward the ridge. Thomas, who had stood up to get a better angle, grunted and fell. "Tomas!" Elias roared. He stumbled, his left hand a cascade of blood, his vision graying at the edges. Clara, released from Grayson's grip, ran to him. "Elias, my God, your hand!" "Tomas," he gasped, pushing past her. Stumbling toward the ledge, he scrambled up the rocks, his good hand slipping, his ruined hand leaving a smear of red on the stone. He found his friend. Thomas was on his back, a terrible wound in his gut. "Elias," Tomas coughed, a bloody smile touching his lips. We did it. Amigo, we scattered them, just like you said." "Hold on, Tomas, hold on," Elias pleaded, pressing his good hand, his right hand, to the wound. It was useless. The blood welled up between his fingers. "It is all right," Thomas whispered. "It is a good day. Tell my Maria. Tell her I settled the debt. For your mother." His eyes lost their focus, staring up at the patch of blue sky. His hand fell open. Elias knelt over the body of his friend, the only friend he had in the world. The adrenaline was gone. The cold clarity was gone. All that was left was the white-hot, screaming agony in his hand, and a cold, vast emptiness in his chest. He had won. He had lost. A single, cold drop of water hit his cheek, then another. The sky, which had been a clear, brutal blue, was clouding over. A sudden, cold rain began to fall, washing the blood from the rocks, turning the dust to mud. He swayed, the world turning black. Clara was there. She had climbed up after him. She saw Thomas, and her hand flew to her mouth. She saw Elias kneeling, covered in his blood, in his friend's blood, shaking. She did not hesitate. She put her arms around him from behind, holding him up as he began to collapse. She pressed her face against his back, her tears mixing with the rain. He slumped against her, his body a dead weight. "He is gone, Clara," he whispered. "I killed him." "We are alive, Elias," she said, her voice fierce, trembling. She held him tighter, her small body taking his weight, her strength a miracle. The rain plastered his hair to his face, revealing the bone-weary exhaustion beneath the warrior. She looked at his ruined hand, the one he had sacrificed to save her. "You carried me," she whispered,
her voice breaking but full of a new, hard strength. "You brought me home when I was dying." She shifted, moving in front of him, forcing him to look at her. She put her arms around him, holding him against her. "Now it is my turn. Elias, it is my turn to keep you alive." He looked at her, his vision tunneling, the sound of the rain filling his ears. He saw her face, the blood from Grayson's blow on her cheek, her eyes full of a love that was as fierce and dangerous as the land itself. He let his head fall forward, resting on her uninjured shoulder, and for the first time in his life, he let someone else be strong for him. The rain was a cold, unforgiving sheet, washing the blood and the gunpowder from the high rocks of Black Mesa. Elias Kane's world had narrowed to a single point of agony in his left arm, and the small, fierce warmth of the woman who was trying to hold him upright. His strength was gone, pouring out of him onto the wet stone, a dark stain that the rain could not wash away fast enough. The death of Tomas was a separate wound, a hollow, freezing void that had opened in his chest. "He is gone?" Elias whispered, his voice a rasping breath. He sagged, a dead weight, his body finally surrendering. "And you are alive," Clara's voice answered, a desperate, shaking thread in the storm. She was strong, but he was a full-grown man, and he was collapsing. "Help!" she screamed, her voice tearing. "Please, somebody help him!" Cale, the Apache leader, emerged from the rocks. His face was like carved granite, impassive. He looked at the body of Grayson, then at the body of Tomas, and his expression tightened in a brief, hard nod of respect. Finally, his black eyes settled on Elias, on the ruin of his hand, and the waxy, deathly pallor of his skin. Two more warriors appeared, their faces grim. They looked at Elias, the half-blood who had worn the blue coat. He had fought with them. He had killed the butcher, Grayson, but he was still an outsider. "He is dying," Clara cried, stumbling toward them, her hands raised in a plea. "He is one of you. His mother was Nellin. Please, do not let him die." The name of his mother shifted something in the leader's eyes. Cale barked an order. The two warriors moved forward, and, with a grim efficiency, lifted Elias between them. He was unconscious, his head lolling. "Where are you taking him?" Clara demanded, grabbing her saddlebag, scrambling after them. "The white man's medicine cannot fix this," Cale said, not looking back. "He needs the earth. We will take him to our camp, but be warned. White woman, if his spirit decides to leave, we will not stop it. We will only show it the way." They moved like ghosts, carrying Elias and the body of Tomas, leaving the dead soldiers to the rain and the scavengers. They traveled for miles, into a high, hidden fold of the mountains, a place so concealed that Clara, even in her terror, marveled that it existed. The camp was small, just a few wickiups clustered by a hidden spring. It was a place of deep shadow and survival. They took Elias to the largest wickiup, the one belonging to an old woman, a shaman whose face was a map of 1,000 winters. Her name was She Who Remembers. They laid Elias on a pallet of dry furs. The old woman knelt, her eyes assessing, her hands, like dried leather, surprisingly gentle. She unwrapped the crude bandage Clara had tied. The sight of the wound made Clara's stomach heave. It was not a hand. It was a mangled ruin of shattered bone and torn flesh. The old woman did not flinch. She began to chant, a low, monotonous hum. She did not use water. She built a small fire of pungent sage, filling the small tent with a thick, biting smoke that made Clara's eyes water. She washed the wound with a hot, dark liquid brewed from roots, and then, taking a wad of sacred tobacco, she pressed it directly into the open, bleeding wound. Elias's body arched off the pallet, a silent, terrible scream of agony. Then he fell back, limp, a shudder running through him. "He is cold," Clara whispered, her hand on his forehead. He was shivering, his skin like ice. Shock. The old woman nodded, her black eyes unreadable.
She motioned to the fire. "Now," Cale translated, his voice a low rumble beside Clara. "We fight the poison. The smoke will cleanse him. The herbs will burn the sickness. But his spirit is torn. He does not know which world to return to." The fever came, as the old woman had known it would. It was not the healing fever Clara had suffered. It was a raging, consuming inferno. For 3 days, Elias was lost. He burned. He thrashed against the firs, his voice crying out in a language that was neither English nor Apache, but a broken babble of the battlefield. He was not in the wickiup. He was trapped in the past, in the fire and the blood he had tried so hard to bury. He was at the creek. The water was red. He could smell the burning canvas, the smell of his mother's people dying. He saw Grayson, smiling, his blue uniform clean. "We are purging the land, Sergeant." He saw Tomas, his face kind, falling, his mouth open in surprise. He saw his father, a tall, blue-eyed shadow, turning his back, walking away, leaving him. The shadows grew cold. He was a boy again, running, hiding. "Nalin," he whispered, his spirit voice a child's. "Mother." She was there. She sat by a fire that did not burn, her hands weaving a basket. She looked exactly as he remembered her, her black hair braided with otter fur, her face kind, but her eyes sad. "You are lost, my son," she said. Her voice was the wind in the high pines, a sound he had not heard in 20 years. "I am lost," he agreed. He looked at his hands. They were whole, but they were covered in blood. "I have killed, Mother. I have killed my own. I have killed the white men. I have no place." "Oh, you killed a man who murdered your soul," she said, her hands never stopping their weaving. "That is not a sin. That is a balancing. Your sickness is not in your hand. Elias, it is in your heart. You believe you are free, but you are a slave to the dead. You have no home because you are a ghost." "My home is gone," he whispered, the old pain rising. "They burned it. My cabin is gone. The Apache do not want me. The whites hunt me. Where is my place?" Nalin looked up, her dark eyes pinning him. "You look for a place. You look for earth, for stone, for a roof. That is not a home." "What is it?" he pleaded. "A home is a person," she said, her voice soft. "A home is an anchor. You have been looking for freedom. You think freedom is running. You think it is land, or a horse, or a gun." She leaned forward, her face filling his vision, the smell of the sage fire all around him. "Freedom is not where you are born, my son. Freedom is not the land you stand on. Freedom is in who you choose to love. You choose your anchor. You choose your home. The rest is just geography." "I do not know how," he said, his voice breaking. "I only know how to fight. I only know how to run." "You carried her," Nalin said, her image beginning to waver, the smoke of the wickiup fire blending with the smoke of her spirit fire. "You carried her. My son, you sang my song. You already know how. You have known all your life. Now, wake up. She is waiting for you." The vision faded. The burning heat of the fever lessened. The voice of his mother was replaced by another, a softer voice, speaking his mother's words. Clara had not left his side. For 7 days, she sat. She was the white woman, the outsider, and at first the Apache women ignored her, their faces closed and hard. But they watched her. They watched her wipe the sweat from his brow. They watched her force water, drop by drop, between his cracked lips. They watched her sleep sitting up, her hand on his chest, as if she could force his heart to beat through her own will. She did not complain. She did not weep. She just endured. She was a stone in the river, unmoving. On the 3rd day, she who remembers offered Clara a bowl of thin corn gruel. Clara took it, bowed her head in thanks, and ate, her eyes never leaving Elias's face. The old woman grunted in approval.
She began to speak to Clara, using hand signs and the few words Cale had taught her. She taught her the word for water, the word for sleep, the word for fight. Clara learned. She was a teacher, and she was a student. She sat with the old women when Elias slept peacefully. She helped them grind corn. Her hands, soft and white, grew calloused. Her stitches on the hides were clumsy, but she worked. She listened. She learned of their losses, of their children taken, of their husbands killed by blue coats, and she began to understand the vast, terrible weight that Elias carried. It was not his guilt alone. It was the guilt of a whole, stolen world. On the 5th day, when Elias was still, his fever a low, simmering coal, she who remembers came to Clara. She motioned for Clara to follow her. She took her to her own wickiup. From a leather pouch, the old woman took a heavy, tarnished silver bracelet. It was simple, hammered, and old. It was beautiful. "This was Nolan's," the old woman said, Cale translating in a low voice. "It was his mother's. She gave it to me before the sickness took her. She said, 'Hold this, for the woman my son will choose, for the one who will be his home.'" The old woman held out the bracelet. "He has chosen. In his fever, his spirit calls your name. He does not call for his mother. He calls for you. You are his anchor. You are his home now." Clara's eyes filled with tears. She held out her arm. The old woman slid the heavy, cool silver onto her wrist. It fit perfectly. It was a binding, a promise. On the 7th day, Elias woke up. The first thing he sensed was the smell. Sage, wood smoke, old leather. It was the smell of his childhood. He was not dead. He opened his eyes. The light was dim, filtered through the reed mats of the wickiup. He was weak. His body felt heavy, disconnected. He tried to move his left hand. A white-hot bolt of pure agony shot up his arm, making him gasp. He looked. His hand was not there. In its place was a large, crude bundle of splints, leaves, and hide. It was a ruin. A wave of cold despair washed over him. A one-handed man, a one-handed scout, a one-handed warrior. He was useless. He was crippled. Elias. His head turned. It was a painful, slow movement. Clara was there. She was sitting on the ground, her back against the wickiup wall, watching him. Her face was thinner, her eyes huge in the dim light, full of a weary, profound relief. She scrambled to her knees, moving to his side. "You are awake." She touched his forehead. "You are cool. The fever is gone." He stared at her. He saw the weariness in her face. He saw the strength. And then he saw her wrist. The firelight caught the dull gleam of silver, his mother's bracelet. He looked from the bracelet to her face. He knew what it meant. He knew the custom. It was a betrothal. It was the sign, given by the clan mothers, that a woman was chosen, that she was under the protection of the spirits, that she was Ti Nadi, one of the family. "She, the old woman?" Clara whispered, her voice rough. She saw where he was looking. "She touched the silver. She gave it to me. She said, 'It was your mother's.' She said, 'It was for me.'" Elias looked at this woman from the east, this teacher. She had been shot. She had been hunted. She had faced down Grayson. She had stitched his flesh. She had sat by him in the fever. She was wearing his mother's silver. He remembered his mother's voice in the dream. "Freedom is in who you choose to love." He was a man with nothing. He had no home. He had no coin. He had one hand. He was a wanted deserter. He had nothing to offer a woman but a life of running. But he had a choice. He was too weak to move, too weak to sit up. He lifted his right hand, his good hand. It was shaking from the weakness, from the fever. He looked at her, his blue eyes, his father's eyes, burning with his mother's spirit. "Clara Monroe," he said. His voice was a dry croak. She waited, her breath catching, her eyes wide. He did not ask a question. He did not speak of love or of marriage or of a future. He did not have those words. He did what his people did. He made a vow. He laid his good hand flat against her chest, over her heart. He could feel its steady, strong beat. He spoke in Apache. The words were soft, a guttural rhythm of the earth. Words she could not understand, but whose meaning was as clear as the spring water. He was binding his spirit to hers. He was giving her his name. What was left of it? He was giving her his life. What was left of it? He was asking her to be his anchor. He was telling her that she was his home. Clara's eyes filled with tears. She did not hesitate. She did not need a translator. She covered his hand with her own, her fingers lacing with his, her silver bracelet pressed cold against his skin. She gave him her answer. She leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. A soft, chaste kiss that tasted of salt and smoke and survival. It was a promise made between two worlds. It was not sealed by a preacher or by a lawman. It was sealed in a wickiup that smelled of sage, witnessed by the ghosts of his ancestors. He, the half-blood warrior. She, the Eastern teacher. They were a single, defiant life. The bond was sealed, but the world outside the hidden canyon did not care for vows made in smoke and shadows. Elias's recovery was slow. A fight waged not just against the ruined flesh of his hand, but against the weakness in his body and the new, terrible emptiness left by Thomas. His left hand, wrapped in stiff hides and poultices by She Who Remembers, was a constant, dull throb. The shaman had saved the arm, but the hand was a memory. The bones were shattered. It would heal into a gnarled, useless fist. Clara, wearing his mother's silver, became his other hand. She cut his food. She helped him clean his rifle, her small, clever fingers learning the mechanisms of the weapon. He sat for hours, his good hand resting on his knee, his frustration a thick, toxic cloud. He was a warrior, a scout, a man whose life depended on his hands. Now, he was half a man. "You are not," she told him, her voice quiet but firm, as she helped him rewrap the bandages one evening. He had just cursed and thrown a sharpening stone, unable to hold it with the clumsy bulk of his bindings. "You do not know what I am," he hissed, his frustration turning on her. "Out there, a man who cannot shoot, cannot rope, cannot fight. He is dead. He is meat." "Then you will learn," she said, her patience a stone wall against his anger. She picked up the sharpening stone and his knife. "Show me how. I will be your left hand until you learn to use your right for both." He stared at her, his anger faltering, replaced by a raw, aching gratitude that he found just as painful. He taught her how to sight the rifle, how to load the revolver with one hand and her teeth. And in teaching her, he began to reteach himself. Cale and the Apache watched. They had buried Tomas in the Apache way, his body wrapped in a blanket, seated facing the east in a high crevice, his rifle with him. They had mourned him as one of their own. They treated Elias with a new respect. He was no longer the outsider. He was the son of Nalin, the man who had brought justice for the dead. But this fragile peace, this small pocket of healing, was built on stolen time. It was 10 days after the battle at Black Mesa. A scout, a young man named Taza, returned to the camp, his horse lathered in sweat, his eyes wide. "They are coming," he said to Cale, his voice low and urgent. "Soldiers, many of them. Not a patrol, a war party. They ride from Drybone." A cold dread settled over the small camp. "How many?" Cale asked. "More than 30, Taza said. "They have wagons. They are not scouts. They are infantry, and they are moving slow. They are coming to kill." Elias stood up, his good hand moving to the revolver at his hip. "They know, the soldiers who fled the mesa. They told their story." "What story?" Cale asked. "Grayson's story," Elias said, his voice flat. "That I am a traitor, that I abducted a white woman, that I am leading an Apache war party. We did not just win a fight, we declared war." Clara came to his side, her face pale. "What will we do?"
Cale's face was grim. "We cannot fight 30 soldiers. We are 10 warriors and 1 half-handed scout. We must scatter. Take to the high mountains. They will burn the wickiups, but they will not find us." "No," Elias said. He looked at the old women, at the children who peered from behind the hides. "You will scatter, and they will hunt you. They will call you hostiles. They will not stop until you are all dead. It is the same as the creek. It is the same story." "Then we die here," Cale said, his voice final. "We will die on our own land." "No," Elias said again. The word was sharp, a command. "You will not die for me. This is my fight. It was my past that brought this."
"Elias," Clara pleaded. "He is right. We must run. North, to Montana. We can lose them."
"They will not let us," Elias said. He looked at Clara, at the silver on her wrist. He remembered his mother's voice. "You choose your home." He turned to Cale. "This is not a war party. It is a lynch mob. They are not coming to fight. They are coming to hang a traitor and rescue a white woman. They will not be expecting a conversation." "Conversation," Cale spat. "You cannot talk to men who come with rifles and torches." "You can," Elias said, "if you speak their language." He looked at Clara. "The story Grayson wrote, it is a lie. We have to tell the truth." "They will not listen to the truth from you," Clara said, her voice full of a cold, new bitterness. "They will not listen to savages. They will only listen to their own." "Then we must give them their own," Elias said. He turned, wincing, and began to strap his gun belt on with his one good hand. "Before Cale carried me from the mesa, after Grayson fell, I took this." He reached inside his shirt. He pulled out a small, leather-bound book, its cover stained with a dark, dried patch of blood. Major Grayson's field journal. "I saw it in his coat," Elias said. "I did not know what it was. I just took it. I took it for you, Clara. I thought it might buy your life. Proof that you were with him, not me." Clara looked at the book, the proof of his lies, or their salvation. "He must ride out," Cale Elias said, his voice flat. "He must ride out and find out who leads them. We must know." The scout was gone for half a day. He returned with news. "It is a captain, a young one. He looks angry, but he rides with the town sheriff, the one they call Brody." "Sheriff Brody." Elias looked at Clara. "There was a chance. Brody was a hard man, but he was not a murderer. He was a man of the law." "Cale," Elias said, "I am walking out to meet them. Alone, I need you to do nothing. Give me your word." "They will kill you," Cale said. "They will kill us all if you fight," Elias said. "But if I talk, maybe they will just kill me." "No," Clara cried, grabbing his arm. "I am coming with you." "No," Elias said, his voice gentle but absolute. "You are the hostage. You are the reason they are here. If they see you with me, wearing this—" He touched the silver bracelet. "They will see proof of Grayson's lie. You must stay hidden until I call for you." "Elias, I will not let you sacrifice yourself." "I am not sacrificing," he said. "I am negotiating. I am a white man, too. It is time I used it." He walked out of the hidden canyon, his left arm in a crude sling, his right hand empty, held away from his body. He walked into the open basin, where the soldiers were dismounting, forming a skirmish line. A young, nervous captain stood at their head, his revolver drawn. Sheriff Brody stood beside him, his shotgun held loosely, his face a mask of weary duty. "Elias Kane," the captain shouted, his voice cracking. "Surrender. In the name of the United States Army, release Miss Monroe, and you will not be harmed." "She is not a prisoner," Elias called back, his voice carrying in the clear air. "She is my wife."
A low, angry murmur went through the soldiers. A few of them were the survivors from Black Mesa.
"Oh, he is lying," one of them yelled. "He is a breed, he has gone native. He murdered the major." "I am Elias Kane," Elias shouted, standing his ground, 20 yards from their rifles. "And Major Grayson was a traitor and a murderer. He is the one who betrayed the army." "That is a lie, you filthy deserter," the captain roared, raising his pistol. "You killed 6 of my men, you will hang for this."
"Captain," Sheriff Brody said, putting a hand on the man's arm. "Hold your fire. Let him speak. This is my jurisdiction, too." He looked at Elias. "Kane, you are in a world of trouble. We found the bodies at the mesa. We know what you did." "You know what Grayson told you," Elias said, his voice steady, "but you do not know why. He was hunting me. He was hunting me to cover up a massacre. The massacre at the border creek, 4 years ago. He ordered the murder of over 100 women and children. I was there. I was his scout. I was a witness. He was erasing me." The captain faltered. He looked at his sergeant. The sergeant scoffed. "Sir, it is a trick. He is a half-breed. He is lying to save his skin." "I am not," Elias said. "I have proof. Major Grayson's own words." He reached into his shirt with his good hand and pulled out the blood-stained journal. He held it up. "His field journal. It is all in here. The orders, the bounty on my head, the plan to eliminate all witnesses. He was a monster." He threw the book onto the ground between them. The captain stared at it. He would not move. He would not stoop to pick it up. "Sheriff," Elias said, his eyes on Brody, "you are a man of the law. Read it." Brody hesitated. He looked at the angry soldiers. He looked at the rocks, where he knew Apache warriors were hiding. He looked at Elias, a man he had only known as a silent, dangerous shadow. He walked forward, picked up the journal, and opened it. He began to read. The silence was absolute, broken only by the flutter of the pages and the jingle of a horse's harness. Brody's face, weathered and tough, went pale. He read for a full minute. Then he looked up, his eyes full of a sick understanding. "My God," he whispered. He turned to the captain. "Captain, the man is telling the truth. It is all here. The creek, the orders, no survivors. He was hunting this man. He put a bounty on him. And the woman." The captain was stunned. "What, sir? That cannot—" It is here in his own hand," Brody snapped. But the soldiers did not care. The sergeant from the mesa stepped forward, his face purple with rage. "I do not care what some book says I saw my friends die. He killed them. That breed. And his savages in the rocks, are we going to let them walk away?" "He murdered United States soldiers." "Sir," another yelled. "He is a traitor." The situation was slipping. The captain, young and unsure, looked at his angry men. The journal was paper. The blood was real. He began to raise his pistol again. "Sergeant Kane, you are still under arrest for the death of—" "Stop!" The voice was not Elias's. It was clear, sharp, and it cut through the masculine rage like a clean knife. Clara Monroe walked out of the canyon. She was not the frightened schoolmarm. She was not the feverish patient. She wore her simple cotton shift. Her hair was tied back with a leather thong, and on her wrist, the heavy silver bracelet gleamed in the sun. She looked like a queen. She walked directly to Elias's side and put her arm through his good one. The soldiers stared, their mouths open. This was the abducted woman. "My name is Clara Monroe," she said, her voice shaking but carrying to every man. "I am a citizen of the United States, and I was not abducted. I am here by my own free will." "Ma'am," the captain said, lowering his gun, his face a mask of confusion. "You do not understand. This man is a wanted criminal." "This man is a hero," Clara interrupted, her voice rising. "He saved my life. He saved it from Major Grayson, who ordered his own men to shoot me in the back. I was there.
I heard the order. Expendable. No witnesses. That is what he called me. She saw a man at the back of the group, a civilian in a derby hat, scribbling in a notebook. The journalist. Clara locked her eyes on him. Are you from the newspaper? Sir, are you writing this down? Then write this. Major Grayson was a war criminal, and this man, Elias Kane, is the only one who had the courage to stop him. He fought for his life, and he fought for mine. He is an Apache lover, the sergeant yelled. Clara turned her fiery gaze on him. He is my husband. A collective gasp went through the crowd. She held up her arm, the silver bracelet a declaration. I am his wife, by the laws of his people, who took us in when we were dying, and by the laws of God, who judges men by their hearts, not by their blood. If you kill him, you are not soldiers. You are murderers. You are a lynch mob. And I demand justice. I demand this man be heard. The captain was trapped, a war hero, a war criminal, a wife demanding justice, and a journalist writing down every single word. This was no longer a military action. It was a political disaster. He looked at Sheriff Brody, who just nodded grimly. The captain sheathed his revolver. His face was tight with humiliation. This is a civilian matter. The Army's business with Major Grayson will be investigated at a higher level. He turned to his men. Sergeant, form the column. We are returning to Drybone. The sergeant stared, his mouth open, but the order was absolute. Sullen, defeated. The soldiers mounted their horses. They turned, a column of angry, silent men, and rode away. Sheriff Brody remained. He watched them go. Then he looked at Elias and Clara. You won, Kane. That was quite a thing. It is not over, Elias said, his body finally sagging with relief. No, Brody agreed. It is not. You are a free man. Technically, the Army will bury this so deep no one will ever find it. But you are not safe here. The sentiment in town, the families of those dead soldiers, they will not forgive this land. It will not be a home for you. Not anymore. Elias looked back at the hidden canyon. He saw Cale standing at the entrance, watching. Cale raised his hand, a sign of farewell, and then stepped back into the shadows. He was right. Brody was right. They had saved the camp, but they had also exposed it. They could not stay. Their presence put the Apache in danger. Elias looked at Clara. She was already looking at him, her eyes full of the same knowledge. Their small, impossible dream of a life here was gone. North, Elias said, his voice rough. Clara nodded, her hand tightening on his arm. North, she agreed. Montana, we will find our own land. A place without ghosts. Elias Kane, a man with one hand, a man with no tribe and no rank, stood in the dust, his home at his back. He looked at the woman beside him, the silver on her wrist a brighter star than the one on any soldier's chest. She was his home. He put his good arm around her, and together, they turned to face the long road. The departure from the Apache camp was quiet, steeped in the shared smoke of a final, respectful council. Cale, the old warrior, had provided them with 2 strong mountain ponies, supplies of dried jerky, corn, and a full water skin. He looked at Elias, at the ruin of his left hand, now bound in a stiff casing of hide and splints. You are a man of 2 spirits, Elias Kane, Cale said, his voice a low rumble. You carry the ghosts of the Nullin and the anger of the white-eyed. You have brought justice to my people. The debt is paid. The debt is not paid, Elias said, his voice rough. He looked toward the high crevice where Thomas lay. It is only transferred. Cale nodded, understanding. Then carry it well. This land is finished for you. The soldiers will not forget, even if they are silent. Go north. The Crow lands are high and cold. They do not love the blue coats.
Clara stood before She Who Remembers. The old woman said nothing, but her black, ancient eyes studied Clara's face. She saw the silver bracelet on her wrist, now a part of her skin. She saw the new, hard strength in her gaze. The shaman reached out a hand, gnarled like a root, and touched the silver. She grunted, a sound of approval. She pressed a small leather pouch into Clara's hand. "For the cold," the old woman said, one of the few English words she knew. Inside, Clara found dried herbs, willow bark for pain, and a different, pungent leaf she did not recognize. The old woman pointed to Clara's belly, then made a rocking motion with her arms. Clara's breath caught, the shaman knew, before she herself was certain. Clara nodded, her face flushing, and tucked the pouch away. They rode out of the hidden canyon, not looking back. They were two people, with two horses, a single working rifle, and a new, shared name. The Arizona Territory, a land of red rock and red blood, fell away behind them. The journey north was 1,000 miles of survival. It was a new education, one that reversed their roles. The desert had been his world. The new world, the world of settlements and ranches, was hers. Elias's hand was a daily torment. The pain was constant, a dull, aching fire. But the helplessness was worse. He was a right-handed man, but he was a two-handed warrior. He could not saddle his own horse with one hand. He could not reload his rifle quickly. He could not tie a knot. He would sit by the fire, his face a mask of cold fury. His teeth gritted as he tried to tie a simple hitch, the rope slipping, his clumsy, bandaged fist useless. Clara would watch him, her heart aching. At first, she offered to help. "Let me," she would say. "No," he hissed, his pride a raw wound. She learned. She stopped offering. She just sat beside him and began to do her own work, her hands moving. And she would talk. She would talk about the East, about the books she had read, about the Greek myths. She spoke of Ulysses, a man who took 10 years to find his way home. She filled the silence, his anger, with her voice. After a week, he threw the rope at her feet. "Show me," he growled. "Show me how your small hands do it. You must be my left hand. I will learn." She showed him. He watched. He learned to work with her. He would hold the tension. She would tie the knot. He would steady the rifle. She would clean the breech. He would hunt, and she would skin the rabbits. Her face grim, but her hands steady. She was no longer afraid of blood. They passed through the Utah Territory, a land of strange, carved gods. They worked. Elias, even with one hand, was a whisperer of horses. He took jobs on small, hardscrabble ranches, breaking the wild mustangs that no one else would touch. He did not use force. He used his mother's way. He used patience. He would stand in a round pen for a day, 2 days, just breathing with the animal, until it understood he was not a threat. Ranchers, who at first scoffed at the one-handed man, paid him in coin and fresh supplies. Clara, in the small railroad towns, offered her services. She mended clothes. She wrote letters for men who could not write their own. In one settlement, she taught in a one-room school for 3 weeks, earning $20. A fortune. The land changed. The red desert gave way to the vast, high plains of Wyoming, a sea of grass that rippled under a sky so big it hurt to look at. And finally, they reached the Montana Territory. It was green. Elias had not seen so much green in his life. It was a land of rolling hills, deep pine forests, and rivers that ran cold and clean. "This is it," he said one evening. They had crested a rise and looked down into a long, wide valley, a river snaking through it, flanked by cottonwood trees. To the west, the mountains rose, their peaks already white with an early snow. "This is the place." They found a stretch of unclaimed land, a half-mile from the river, sheltered in a small aspen grove. They were squatters, but so was everyone. The land was free to whoever was strong enough to hold it. They built a cabin. It was not a small,
hasty shelter. It was a home. Elias felled the trees, his good arm and his back straining, his movements slow but powerful. Clara, now his true left hand, helped him notch the logs. It took 2 months, a race against the coming winter. But as the first snows fell, they had a roof, a stone fireplace, and a solid door. Their new life took shape. Elias was a horseman. He spent his days in the high country, tracking the wild herds. He would capture them, not with a rope, which he could no longer truly master, but with a deep trap, a corral built into a box canyon. He broke them, and he sold them to the army post 2 days south, and to the ranchers who were beginning to fill the valley. His reputation grew. He was the one-hand horseman, the man who spoke to the wild things. Clara, as the shaman had predicted, opened a school. It was held in their cabin, around the fireplace. The ranchers' children, 7 of them, rode in every day. She taught them sums. She taught them to read from her single, battered copy of Shakespeare, and from the new dime novels that came in on the train. She was the valley's teacher. Elias, in the evenings, would listen to the children. He would sit by the fire, mending a bridle, his hook, which he now sometimes used, held in his teeth. He would listen to Clara's voice. Reading. He would watch the firelight on her face. He began to teach the children. Too, he taught the boys and the girls how to read the tracks of a deer. He taught them which berries were poison and which were sweet. He taught them how to set a snare, how to be quiet in the woods. Clara gave them the world in books. He gave them the world under their feet. They were a partnership. They were Mr. Cain and Mrs. Cain. They were respected. The ritual continued. The promise he had made, it was not a thing of words, but of action. Some nights, Clara would be exhausted, falling asleep at the table, a stack of mending beside her. Elias would come in from the barn, the smell of horses and cold air on him. He would stand for a moment, just watching her. Then, with his one good arm, he would hook his hand under her knees, his shoulder under her back, and he would lift her. His strength was different now. It was not the explosive power of a warrior, but the deep, steady strength of a man who lifts and holds and builds. He would carry her to their bed and lay her down, pulling the quilt over her. He would kiss her forehead, the silver bracelet on her wrist cold against his lips. He was carrying her home. One afternoon in the second spring they were there. A rider came. He was not a rancher. He wore the blue, faded uniform of an army courier. Elias saw him from the corral. The old, cold fear returned instantly. He stood by the gate, his good hand resting on the latch, his face impassive. Clara came out of the cabin, the children running behind her, and stood on the porch, her hands clasped, her face pale. The courier did not dismount. He looked at Elias, at his one useless, gnarled hand, at the peaceful cabin. "Elias Cain?" he asked. "I am," Elias said. The courier reached into a leather satchel. "This is for you, from Washington, Department of War." He handed Elias a thick official envelope. Elias took it. The courier nodded, his duty done, and rode away. Elias stood for a long time, just holding the envelope. Clara walked to him, her face tight with worry. "What is it?" "A ghost," he said. He opened it with his good hand and his teeth, tearing the thick paper. He pulled out the letter. He read it, his eyes scanning the formal, typed script. Clara watched his face. It did not change. "Well," she finally whispered. He was silent for a moment. Then he read, his voice flat. "The Journal of Major Silas Grayson. Received an internal investigation. Concluded. The actions at Sand Creek were deemed unauthorized and a grievous breach of Army protocol. Grayson's name has been stricken. All bounties rescinded." Clara let out a breath she had been holding for 2 years. "It is over," she whispered. "It is truly over." Not just over, Elias said, his voice hard. He read the last paragraph. In light of your exemplary, if unorthodox, service in stopping a rogue officer, all charges of desertion are hereby dismissed. Your honor is restored. You are invited to re-enlist at the rank of sergeant, with all back pay provided. Clara looked at him, her heart in her throat. This was it, the thing that had been stolen from him. His name, his rank, his honor. Elias looked at the letter. He looked at the cabin he had built with one hand. He looked at the children, who were now shyly peeking around Clara's skirt. He looked at his horses in the corral. He looked at the mountains, free and white, in the distance. He folded the letter, slowly, deliberately. He walked to the small fire they kept for the branding irons.
Elias, what are you doing?
Clara asked. They are offering me a title, he said, his voice quiet. I already have freedom. He dropped the letter into the flames. They watched the paper curl, the black words disappearing into smoke. His honor was not on a piece of paper. His honor was in the logs of his home, in the face of his wife. They never forgot the price of that freedom. Thomas was a ghost who sat with them. His memory was a sharp, clean ache. They could not go back to Arizona to visit his grave, so they made him one in Montana. They chose a place at the edge of the aspen grove, a spot that overlooked the river, where the morning sun would hit first. They did not build a cross. They built a cairn, a tall, steady pile of river stones. Elias, with his one good hand, found a flat piece of slate, and Clara, using a nail, scratched one word into it, amigo. They stood there, just the two of them, the wind in the trees. Elias placed his good hand on the stone. Clara laid hers beside it. They did not pray. They just remembered. Life settled into its rhythm. The school, the horses, the building of a barn, the long, cold winters and the bright, explosive springs. One morning, Clara was standing by the window, looking out, but not seeing. She had been pale for weeks, her morning energy gone. Elias came up behind her. He did not ask what was wrong. He had seen the signs. He was a scout. He knew. He simply put his good arm around her waist, pulling her back against his chest, his gnarled, useless hand, the fist of scar tissue. He rested gently on her stomach. Clara covered his ruined hand with her own, her fingers lacing over the scars, the silver bracelet resting against his skin. She leaned her head back against his shoulder.
I think,
she whispered, her voice full of a quiet, new wonder,
that you will need to build a cradle. Elias.
He said nothing. He just held her. His grip tightened, a promise of protection, a vow of life. He was a man with no past, no rank, and one hand, and he had everything. They stood together at the window, watching the sun rise. It was not the violent, bleeding sunset of the Arizona desert. It was a new sun, a Montana sun, spilling gold and rose light across the vast, open meadows. It was the color of a promise. It was the color of freedom. 10 years passed, 10 hard Montana winters, each one a test of endurance. Each one survived. The land was not tame. It was still a place of brutal cold, sudden storms, and the distant, hungry cry of the wolf. But the small cabin Elias and Clara had built with one good hand and an unbreakable will was no longer just a cabin. It was a ranch. The log structure had grown. A second room had been added for the school, and then a lean-to kitchen, built from timber Elias had cut and milled himself. The barn was the largest in the valley, its beams solid, its loft full of sweet hay, its stalls lined with the finest horses in the territory. The valley had filled in, but the Kane Ranch, tucked into the aspen grove by the river, was the anchor. Elias Kane was gray at the temples now. The lines around his blue eyes were deeper, etched by a decade of squinting into the high country sun, and sometimes by laughter. The silent, burning rage that had fueled him in the Arizona desert was gone. It had been banked, cooled by the snows, and replaced by a deep, quiet strength. His left hand, as She Who Remembers had predicted, had healed into a gnarled, useless fist of scar tissue. He had adapted. He wore a simple leather cup over it when he worked, a tool for leverage. He could saddle his horse with his one good hand faster than most men could with two. He still rode out every day, his territory the high meadows, checking his herds. He was no longer a ghost running from his past. He was a landmark. He was the man who spoke to horses. Clara was the heart of that ranch. Her dark hair, too, had threads of silver, pulled back in the same practical bun. The silver bracelet, his mother's, was a part of her, its metal worn smooth against her skin. Her school was famous in the territory. Ranchers sent their children 50 miles to board with other families, just to learn at Mrs. Kane's desk. She taught them sums and reading, but she also taught them honor and the idea that a person's worth was in their word. And there was Sarah Nayland Kane. She was 9 years old, a child of the high country. She had her mother's dark, curious hair, but her eyes were her father's, a piercing, impossible blue. She could read Shakespeare from the book her mother treasured, and she could read the tracks of a snowshoe hare across a frozen drift, a language her father had taught her. The West was still wild. It did not forget how to kill. The evening came on fast, as it does in the high country. It was deep winter. A low gray sky had pressed down on the valley all day, the air unnervingly still, the smoke from their chimney rising in a perfectly straight line. Elias was late. He had ridden out before dawn, checking his traps on the high ridge. A journey that should have had him home by 4. The storm hit without warning. It was not a gentle snow. It was a blizzard. A solid wall of white descended on the valley, a horizontal, screaming wind that instantly erased the world. The temperature plummeted, dropping 20 degrees in an hour. Clara stood at the cabin window, her hand pressed to the cold, frosted glass. She could not see the barn, only 10 yards away. The wind howled, a high, thin sound like a mourning woman. Sarah, finished with her supper, came to stand beside her, pressing her face to the other pane. "Mama, why is the wind so angry?" "It is just the wind. Sweet," Clara said, her voice calm, but her heart, even after 10 years, was a cold knot. This land, it still took. "Papa is out in it," Sarah said. It was not a question. It was a statement of fact. "He is," Clara agreed. They stood in silence for another hour. The cabin creaked and shuddered under the assault. The snow, fine and sharp as glass, was already piling in drifts against the door. "Mama," Sarah asked again, her voice smaller now. "What if Papa gets lost? What if the white wind eats him?" Clara turned from the window. The fire in the hearth was the only warm, safe thing in the world. She sat in her rocking chair, pulling her daughter onto her lap. The child was trembling. "Your father will not get lost," Clara said, smoothing the dark hair. "But how do you know?" Sarah insisted, her blue eyes full of the storm. "You cannot even see the trees. How does he always find his way back? Cale came last summer, and he told me Papa is half spirit. Is that why does he talk to the wind?" Clara smiled. It was a soft, private expression, her gaze lost in the flames. Her hand went to her wrist, her thumb rubbing the worn silver. "No, sweet, it is not because he is a spirit." She looked back, not at the storm, but through the years. She saw a burning cabin in Arizona. She saw a hidden Apache camp. She saw a man, delirious with fever, whispering a promise. "Your father always comes home," Clara whispered, her voice for her daughter, but her words for her own heart. "Because he promised me he would. A long, long time ago. Before you were born, when I was sick, and he was carrying me. He promised he would carry Mama home, every single night, until he died. And that promise, Sarah,
That promise has never ended. It is the compass that guides him. It is stronger than any storm. As if the words themselves had power. The cabin door burst open, a swirl of snow and ice filling the room, extinguishing the lamps on the table. A figure stood there, a creature of the storm, caked in ice, his hat and shoulders a solid mass of white. He was breathing hard. He slammed the door, the heavy thud sealing the storm outside. He stood in the firelight, the snow melting from his frozen beard. He looked at his wife and his daughter, safe, warm. He was exhausted, but he was home. "You are late," Clara said, her voice steady, though her hands were shaking with relief. "The wind was in my face," Elias Kane said, his voice a low, rough rasp. He unslung his rifle from his back. "It is cold."
Papa.
Sarah launched herself from her mother's lap, wrapping her arms around his frozen legs.
I knew you would come. Mama said you had a promise.
Elias looked over his daughter's head at his wife. He did not smile, but his blue eyes softened. "I did." The storm raged for 2 days. The cabin was an island of warmth in a sea of white. When the wind finally died, the world was silent, buried. The story does not end in the storm. It ends in the quiet that follows. It ends in the everyday keeping of the vow. It ends on an evening in the late summer. Months later, the valley was green, the high meadows full of paintbrush and lupine. Elias and Clara had ridden out together, checking the river for breaks in the bank. A quiet, shared work. They were riding home, the sun afire in the west, painting the clouds in shades of orange and blood, the exact colors of the Arizona desert he had long since left behind. They reached the river, the one that ran through their land. It was running full and fast, swollen with snowmelt from the high peaks. Clara's horse, the aging sorrel mare she had ridden for a decade, stumbled on a loose rock in the middle of the crossing. The horse did not fall, but it lunged, and Clara, caught off guard, slipped from the saddle. She landed in the shallow, fast-moving water with a gasp and a laugh. The water was bitingly cold. She sat up, the current pulling at her, pushing her wet hair into her face. "Well," she sputtered, "that was not graceful." Elias was off his own horse in a second. He was at her side, wading through the rushing water, his face tight with that fierce, protective concern that had never faded. "Are you hurt?"
Only my pride,
she said, still laughing, trying to push herself up.
and I am cold.
He looked at her, his wife, sitting in the middle of the creek, her skirt soaked, her hair coming undone. The sunset turned the water around her to liquid fire. He saw the silver bracelet on her wrist, gleaming. He did not offer her his hand to help her up. He bent. With his one good arm, he hooked his hand under her knees. He put his scarred, ruined hand, his anchor, on her back, supporting her. He scooped her up from the river.
Elias,
She cried, startled, her arms instinctively going around his neck.
put me down. I am a grown woman, not a child. What are you doing? I can walk.
He did not answer. He just held her. He held her close, her wet dress soaking his shirt, her heart beating against his chest. He began to walk, carrying her out of the river, up the bank, his boots sinking into the soft mud. He walked toward their home, the cabin on the hill, silhouetted against the last, burning light of the day. The west was still wild. The mountains were still hard. The winters were still long. Nothing was guaranteed. But they had this small, quiet patch of peace, bought with blood and built with stubbornness. He stopped at the top of the bank. He looked down at her face, her eyes shining in the twilight. "I cannot promise fancy things," Elias Kane whispered, his voice rough with a decade of love. "But I will carry you home, every night, till I die." He did not just say the promise, he kept it, and that, in a land of broken treaties and forgotten words, was the only thing that was truly sacred. Thank you for listening to the story We would love to know where you are listening from. So please share your location in the comments and let us know your thoughts. If you enjoyed this tale, please subscribe to our channel, Wild West Tales, and like this video. Be sure to press the hype button to help this story reach more listeners.